This is something that happened back on Halloween night when I was a kid. I remember that I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I was going to go trick-or-treating. My older sister was 16, and she did not go trick-or-treating anymore, so she was going to go with me and act as my babysitter for the night. I wanted to go trick-or-treating by myself, but my parents said that she had to go with me, and I was too young. They obviously didn't want me walking up and down the street all by myself at night, even if it was Halloween. So we set out at around 6 p.m., and I was going trick-or-treating as a football player. Our neighborhood was huge. There were many different houses along it, and the plan was to go up and down our street and maybe 3 or 4 other streets, really however much we had time to do. So my sister would walk with me along the sidewalk, and then she would stand at the end of the driveways and wait for me as I went up to the houses. I saw a decent amount of other kids and parents also out as the night went on. At one point, at least 2 hours in, I went to this one house a few streets over from ours. The driveway was pretty long, and I went up to the house and I rang the doorbell. The owner of the house said hi and gave me some candy. When I walked away though, I saw that there was this older looking minivan stopped on the side of the road. It looked like the driver of the van was talking to my sister. I walked back down the driveway to my sister, and I didn't really know what was going on. But shortly after I got there, the van just drove away. I remember my sister telling me that the guy in the van tried giving her a ride. She said that he asked her if she needed a ride, and even after she said no, he was telling her to hop in. We were both kind of creeped out about it. I didn't know if the guy had bad intentions or if he actually thought she needed a ride, but I knew that we obviously were not supposed to get rides from strangers. We kept going down the street, and I was going to more houses. About 20 minutes later though, as I walked along the sidewalk with my sister, we saw the van again. It was driving down the road from the opposite way and going really slow. When it approached us, the driver's window rolled down. I saw this man with a beard and kind of long hair. He had an overall sloppy appearance, and as his van slowed down significantly, he said hi to me and my sister. He asked us if we needed a ride again. My sister was quick to say no, and we kept walking. The guy said in a creepy way, "You sure?" Then he drove off. My sister then said that we should probably head back now. By then, it was getting a little bit later anyways, and there were significantly less kids and parents out. Even though I wanted more candy, I agreed. I was a little bit worried that the man would come back again. So I went to just like 10 more houses, and then we decided to go back. I was satisfied with the amount of candy that I had gotten. As I walked with my sister, we got towards the end of the street that we were on and then turned. We walked past this little park that connected to our neighborhood. There were more houses on the other side of the park. As we walked past, I could just barely see the same van driving through that neighborhood. We walked faster and hoped to make it back. Soon we reached our street, but the street was very long and it would still take us a few minutes to reach our house. As we were walking down, I heard a car approaching us from behind. I looked back and saw that it was the same van. When it was still a good distance away, my sister and I both picked up that it was the van and recognized it. My sister told me to go up the driveway to the house that we were right in front of. Even though I had already trick-or-treated there, I did. This time, my sister went with me. When we got all the way up to the door, we watched, and the van slowly drove by. It appeared to almost come to a stop when it was directly in front of the house that we were at, but eventually it did drive away. Then my sister and I returned to the sidewalk. We started walking as fast as we could to get back home. Now, this was before cell phones were really that popular, and my sister didn't have one yet despite being 16, so we couldn't call my parents or anything. As we walked down the street, we soon saw up ahead that the same van was now parked on the side of the road. We would have to walk past it. We decided to just go for it, and we went even faster. We were basically jogging now. When we went past the van, at first it didn't do anything, but then I could hear it starting to drive. Our house was within sight at this point. My sister and I both started sprinting, and we got through the front yard. We went right up to the front door and then got inside. The first thing that we did after entering was lock the door behind us, and then my sister found our parents. She told them how a creepy guy was following us and stuff. We went to the window and we saw that the van was parked right out front, but nobody appeared to be inside of it. I remember that my dad actually went outside and approached the van. He knocked on the window and looked inside, but soon returned, saying that nobody was in the van. We knew that it was not a neighbor or anything. then, like 30 seconds after my dad got inside, somebody tried opening the back door to our house. We all knew that it was the guy. My dad walked over to the back of the house and yelled from the other side that he was calling the cops. The man actually ran around our house, and then we saw him sprint back to his van and get inside. He quickly drove away after that. My parents called the police, and they arrived a while later. We told the police everything that we could, and they said that they would try to locate the man. Then they left. I'm guessing that the guy left town after that. I'm not sure if he was ever found, but I know that I never saw him again after that, and I'm really glad that my sister and I got away from him. This story happened 2 years ago on Halloween, and is one of the most disturbing things to happen in my life. I'm a father of a boy who is now 8 years old, but was 6 at the time of this story. I went out trick-or-treating with him and my wife around our neighborhood, which had quite a few kids in it, and it was a pretty busy night. We stayed out maybe 2 hours until my son got tired and was satisfied with the amount of candy that he had. Then we walked back home and went inside. We had just left a bowl of candy out front of our house while we were gone, which was empty by the time we got back, even though it was only 8 o'clock. Only about a minute after we got back inside, as my son was starting to dig into his candy, the doorbell rang, which I knew was likely another trick-or-treater. I opened the front door to see a little boy about the age of my son and his father standing there smiling. I called to my wife to ask if we had more candy as the man said hi to me. I noticed that his son was kind of jumping up and down, and the man said he was really sorry, but his son had to use the bathroom, and said they were about a 30-minute walk from their house. I saw my wife give me a look from across the room, and I didn't really want to let them in the house, but I figured I had to, so I told them they could. The boy ran down the hall, and I walked over to my wife. She said she didn't like the idea of people just walking into our home, and I didn't either, but the dad seemed nice enough. I told my wife everything was fine, and about a minute later, the boy returned with his father, who said thank you several times. I handed him a little candy, and they went on their way. At that point, it was a relief to me that they were gone from the house, and the rest of the night we got quite a few more trick-or-treaters. Finally, after that, we all went to bed. Everything was good until I was woken up in the night to the sound of my son yelling and running to my bedroom. My wife and I got up and saw that he was right outside our room, saying that a man had climbed in his window. I ran down the hall into his bedroom and saw his window was wide open, with the man who had been in our house earlier getting outside of it. This was a horrible feeling, but I was just glad that my son seemed to be okay. I chased after the man, but he got out of sight, so at that point I decided to call the police. I was quite angry until they arrived. We told them everything, and my wife and I stayed up for the rest of the night. For the next few days, we slept with our son in our bedroom with us, until we finally received news that the police had found the man. We were told that the boy who came into our house to use the bathroom was not the man's actual son, but a boy who had been abducted by him a whole year prior. This news was very disturbing to hear, but the boy was returned to his family, and I'm just glad that the man was brought to justice. Back when I was in college, I had a crazy experience one Halloween. It was my junior year, and I will also mention that I'm a female for background information. I was 21 and had been going to the university for 3 years. It was a pretty large university with thousands of students, and I lived in an apartment with my roommate. So for Halloween that year, me and some friends were invited to a Halloween party. It was at a friend's house who had hosted several college parties earlier in the year. That night, we first went to a bar, and it was really busy there with it being Halloween night. Most people had all kinds of different costumes on and stuff. Then we walked over to the party at my friend's house. It was several blocks away from where we lived, and about a 10-minute walk from the bar. When we got there, there was already a good amount of people at the party, and we knew most of them. It only got busier and busier though. At one point during the Halloween party, one of my friends came up to me and pointed out a guy who was across the room. He was a guy with dark hair, and I'm not even sure what his costume was, but she told me that he was a creep, and she wanted to leave now that she saw that he was at the party. I asked her what he did, and she just said that he's really weird and he wouldn't leave her alone in the past. Then she said that she needed to get out of there before he saw her, and she walked away. I wasn't going to leave just yet though, because all my other friends were still there. So probably 30 minutes went by, and I remember that all of a sudden, this guy came up to me. It was the same guy my friend said was a creep. Personally, I had no clue who he was, and I had never seen him before. I assumed that he went to the same college though. He said hi and introduced himself to me. I was really not that interested in him, but I did have a short conversation with the guy. He didn't say anything that weird or creepy at first, but he did come across as a little strange. After talking to him for like 2 or 3 minutes, I said that I was going to get something to drink and I walked away, but the guy just followed me over there and kind of kept talking to me. By then, the party was extremely crowded, and I didn't know as many people there anymore. I really didn't want to talk to this guy, but he wouldn't leave me alone. Then one of my friends came up to me, and she said that they were going to Jake's house and asked if I wanted to go. Jake was in our friend group, but I had never personally been to his house. By then, I was ready to leave the party, and I said yes, I would go. My friend said that she was going to get one of our other friends and then leave, and then she walked away into the crowd of people. I should have went with her right then and there, but I didn't. It was so crowded that I didn't know where anybody else was in the moment. Meanwhile, the guy continued to talk to me, and I remember he asked me if I wanted to go to his house. I told him no, I couldn't. I said that I was going to Jake's house. I remembered that this guy said that he knew where Jake lived, and he was also going there. I was not happy to hear that he was going to be there, but I asked him what Jake's address was. The guy told it to me, and I put it in my phone. Then I told him that I was going to the bathroom before leaving. I said that because I was afraid that he would want to go to Jake's with me, and I wanted this guy to leave me alone. So I walked upstairs and used the bathroom at the crowded party. When I got out, the guy was thankfully gone. My friends were also gone though. I looked all around the party for them and I couldn't find them anywhere. So I put in the address to Jake's that the guy gave me. It was like a 15-minute walk. So I set out by myself and I started walking on the now quiet streets. I made my way along the sidewalk, and I was seeming to be getting farther and farther away from campus, but I didn't really question it. When I got to the street that Jake lived on, I realized that it looked pretty run down. These houses were not in very good shape at all. I mean, most college houses are old and in not the best shape, but these were really rough. Soon I saw the address, but it just didn't seem right. The house appeared to have the lights off, and I couldn't tell if anybody was there. I double-checked the address on my maps and it was correct, so I walked up to the front step, and I didn't hear any noise from inside like people talking or anything. Before I could open the door and knock though, the door opened. A man stood there, wearing all black and a ski mask. I figured it to be a costume for Halloween, but it was still creepy. I didn't recognize the guy. He didn't say anything, but he waved me in. I realized right then that I was definitely at the wrong house, because looking inside, all the lights were out. I started backing away, and I said that I was at the wrong address. Then I saw another guy emerge from the darkness in the house. It was the same guy who kept talking to me at the party. He told me to come inside, and I told him that this was not Jake's house. The guy then admitted it wasn't, and said that it was his house. I turned around and started walking away. The guy actually followed me out of the door though. He started walking after me outside, and at that point, I just took off running. I heard the guy start to run after me. I sprinted down the street and then went into a random yard. I cut through it and then went into the person's backyard. I then cut through another property to the next street over. After that, I stopped and I caught my breath. I didn't see the guy chasing me anymore. I walked along the sidewalk and called several of my friends until one of them picked up. I told them what happened. One of the guys at Jake's house came and picked me up after that. Luckily, I didn't see the other guy in the meantime. Then I was reunited with my friends. After that night, I never saw that guy again. I guess my friend was right about him being a creep. This is my story of Halloween last year. I was home and in my basement watching a movie with my friend. She had come over to hang out with me after we both spent some time with some more people in our friend group earlier. We were going to watch some movies, not necessarily scary movies though. I did get a few trick-or-treaters throughout the night as well. My house is a little bit in a quiet neighborhood, where most of the properties are about an acre or two, but the neighborhood kids still come around and trick-or-treat. I kept a bowl of candy by the door, and we would get interrupted about every 10 or 15 minutes or so, but that only lasted until about 9 or 9:30 p.m. Then it pretty much stopped. So at almost 11 p.m., when the doorbell rang, I found it odd. I went upstairs from the basement as my friend stayed down. When I got to the front door, I saw somebody dressed up as a cat standing on the front step. The person looked a little bit too tall to be a kid, but I guessed it was possible. Their costume was sort of creepy on its own, because the mask was big and very realistic looking. I couldn't tell at all what the person wearing it looked like. I decided to open up the door because I was still up and had a bit of candy left. When I did, the person said, "Trick or treat." But I could tell by the voice that it was a man and not a child at all. I laughed a little and asked him his age. He didn't answer me, but just stood there. I gave him a piece of candy as he stood there facing me. I said that it was a little bit late to be trick-or-treating, but the guy didn't respond. In fact, he actually took a step closer to me. This seemed a little bit weird, so I stepped back inside and closed the door. I told him good night, and after I did, I locked the door and noticed the guy was still standing on my front step. It was pretty weird, but I just went back downstairs after that. We unpaused the movie, and I figured that would be the last of the trick-or-treaters. But only about a minute later, my doorbell rang again. I paused the movie again and rolled my eyes. I had a feeling it was the guy dressed up as the cat, but what could he want? I told my friend about him, and she followed me upstairs. We both got up to see that the guy was still in fact standing there on the front step. I didn't know what he wanted. I already gave him candy. Besides, he wasn't even a child, but a grown adult, and I didn't know who he was. I decided that I wasn't going to answer it this time. We both watched him for about a minute or so, and then decided to go back downstairs. I just hoped that he would get the idea and walk away. After we went back downstairs, I unpaused the movie again. For the next 10 minutes, everything was fine. We were on the couch in my finished basement watching TV down there because that was my biggest television. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. The basement was mostly below ground, but there were a couple of windows to outside. I saw somebody was at one of the windows. When I focused my eye on it, it was pretty dark, but I could see the cat face looking in. The guy was there looking at us. I screamed after seeing him, and my friend followed shortly after. We both then ran back upstairs. I was panicking at first and didn't know what to do. Eventually, when I calmed down a little, I went to look out of a different window into the backyard. I didn't see anything though. I turned on a light which revealed nobody was currently back there at all. He must have left. We then went around to every single window in the house and looked out. The guy was now gone. He didn't come back for the rest of the night. I never found out who he was or what he actually wanted. The way he acted, though, was just very creepy. This story happened many years ago when I was about 8 years old. I went trick-or-treating with my best friend Bobby. We would often trick-or-treat together and then sleep over at each other's houses afterwards. It was a fun tradition. On this year, we were determined to get as much candy as we possibly could, so after going through my neighborhood, we went farther down the street into another neighborhood. I had never really been over there, but there were a lot more houses, and that meant more candy for us. We went to house after house for hours, and finally it reached about 9 p.m., and more houses had their lights turned off, so we decided to start wrapping it up. We decided to finish the street we were on because there was only one more house left on it. When we got to the front door, we rang the bell. An older man answered it. He smiled at us and said that he hadn't had many trick-or-treaters in a while and had his candy put away. We said that that was okay and started to turn around to leave. The man stopped us and insisted that we should get some candy. He said he had been giving out king-sized candy bars and they were just upstairs in his house. Then he motioned for us to come inside. I felt kind of uncomfortable going in a stranger's house, but he seemed nice and Bobby was already inside, so I followed. We walked into the front door and up the stairs. The man walked behind us.
but once we got upstairs, I didn't see any candy. Bobby asked the man where the candy was, and the man replied that he must have misplaced it. Bobby turned around and went back down the stairs and said we were leaving. I was more than happy to see this, and I followed him right out the door. The man asked us to stay, but at this point, he was just seeming creepy, so we left. After that, we walked back to my house and started eating our candy. It was the most candy we had ever gotten. We went in my room and hung out and played some video games. It was a really fun night, until we were playing Madden, and Bobby said, "Remember the old man that made us go in his house?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I see him in the window." I thought Bobby had to be joking, and I laughed. But then he told me he was serious. I looked over and sure enough saw him. The old man wasn't looking at us and seemed to be walking around about 10 feet away from the window. We watched him walk up to the side of our house and look in another window, which was the kitchen. Then he made his way back over to my room, and when he got to our window, we both ducked and ran for the other end of the room. We hid so that we couldn't see the window, but we heard the man pressing his face up against it. We waited in silence for about a minute, and then we both looked at the same time. When we did, we saw the man's face pressed up against the glass looking directly at us. He had a disgusting and creepy smile on his face. Me and Bobby both ran as fast as we could to my parents' room, screaming the whole time. My father came out and we told him everything. He called the police and then went outside. He came back in saying he didn't see anything, and the police arrived shortly after that. We were able to tell the police where the man lived, and he ended up being arrested. I felt much safer after that.
I'm going to tell you my scariest experience from trick-or-treating as a kid. It happened a long time ago when I was like 8 years old. I was trick-or-treating with my sister, and I was Spider-Man and she was Wonder Woman. Our parents let us go out trick-or-treating in our neighborhood that night. We lived in an area a little more out in the country, so there wouldn't be many other kids out. However, there were about 3 or 4 longer streets that we could walk on, so we'd usually get enough candy. When we left our house, we first went to the other houses on our street, and then we went over to the other ones in our neighborhood. When we got about 2 blocks away from our house, I remember we were walking on the street, and then a car came driving towards us. We moved to the side of the street to let it pass. It was dark out, so we saw the headlights and were expecting the car to just drive right past us. Instead, when the car reached us, it slowed down and nearly stopped. We looked over to it, and the windows then rolled down. There appeared to be 3 people in the car, 2 in the front and 1 in the back. They all seemed to be adults and were wearing really creepy masks. One was a clown mask, the other 2 were just like creepy ones. I'm not going to lie, it scared me, but it was Halloween after all, and my sister laughed a little, so I forced myself to laugh too. They didn't say anything, but just drove along with us, staring at us in their creepy masks. This went on for much longer than it was comfortable, maybe like 20 or 30 seconds. My sister and I didn't really know what to do and just kept walking. Finally, they suddenly sped away, leaving a screeching noise from their tires when they sped down the street. My sister asked, "What was that?" I was just as confused as she was and said, "I have no idea." We were just glad that they were gone, and we continued on to the next house. It was maybe 30 minutes later when the car returned. It came from the same direction that it had come from before, and they literally did the same things again this time. Rolled down the windows, stared at us, and drove the car at the same speed as we were walking. Finally, after a while, they sped away again. It creeped me out even more this time, but only about 1 minute after they had left, they came back. It was as if they drove down the road, stopped, turned around, and then sped back. They came back going much faster than they should on a residential road. My sister and I went into someone's yard a little. The car stopped at us once more, and they rolled down their windows and stared at us. But this time, the guy in the back seat opened up his door, revealing a large bag of candy. Without saying anything, he motioned us over to get inside the car. Neither me or my sister were willing to even get close to that car, and we both just shook our heads. The men just kept waving us over though. We started walking back in the other direction, and they then put the car into reverse and kept driving along with us. My sister told the men to leave us alone, and we then began to walk faster, but the car just kept going into reverse at our same speed. We then decided to go up the next driveway that we saw to a house that we had just trick-or-treated at a minute before. The car stayed on the side of the street and parked, and we went up and knocked on their door. When they answered, we saw the car speeding away. We told the homeowner what had happened, and they were nice enough to let us call our parents on their phone, who then came and picked us up. We were done trick-or-treating for the night after that, but thankfully, never saw the car or the men again. I'm not sure if they were just trying to scare us or something more. I just know I'm glad I didn't get inside. I live by myself in a smaller 2-bedroom house. Last Halloween, something really strange happened. I don't really celebrate Halloween or do anything for it. I'm an adult, and I'm not really into horror stuff, and I don't really have friends that are either. So most Halloweens are just a normal day for me. However, I do always make sure to have some candy on hand around Halloween to give to kids. My neighborhood is usually pretty quiet though, so I might get like 10 trick-or-treaters if that. Last year, shortly after I got home from work, the trick-or-treaters started. There were a few at around 5:30 or 6 p.m. I was mostly just in my living room, and I would occasionally get up and give the candy to the kids. I got about the usual amount of trick-or-treaters. By 8 or 9 p.m., things had quieted down significantly, and there weren't really any more people trick-or-treating. But that's when the doorbell rang as I was sitting there watching TV. I got up and walked over to the front door and looked out. I thought that it would be a kid trick-or-treating, but when I got to the door, nobody was there. I didn't think too much of it, and I went back into the living room. Probably 30 minutes later, there was a knocking at the door. It was pretty loud and constant. When I heard it, I got up, and the knocking kept going for a good 10 or 15 seconds straight. By the time that I reached the door, though, it had stopped. After looking outside, nobody was there again. This time, I stepped outside and I looked around. There was nobody that I could see, so I went back inside after that. It was probably just a prank, somebody knocking on my door and then running off, but it was kind of weird. After that, though, it didn't happen again for the rest of the night. A while later, I went to bed. The next day was now November 1st, and it was a pretty normal day for me with work and stuff. That night, though, at around 10 o'clock, there was another knocking on my door. This was really weird now, because it wasn't Halloween anymore. The knocking, just like the previous night, was constant and pretty loud. I went over to go and see who it was again. However, the knocking stopped as I approached, and when I finally got to look out the window, nobody was there. I once more went outside and I looked around. I even walked around the front yard a little bit. I couldn't see anybody though, so at that point I went back in, and I didn't get any more knocking that night. Well, the next night it happened yet again. Once more, it was a little bit later, and I was in the living room. There was the same loud and constant knocking. This time, I stayed where I was. The knocking kept going for like 30 seconds straight though, so at that point, I got up and I ran over to the door. When I approached it though, the knocking stopped again. I opened up the door and nobody was there. I looked around and thought that I saw movement down the street of possibly somebody running away, but I didn't get any kind of good look at all. I went back inside after that, and the rest of the night there was no more knocking. The next night nothing happened, and since then I haven't had any more strange occurrences. I'm guessing that it was just a prank by maybe one of the neighbors or something. Still, to do it 3 nights in a row like that after Halloween is pretty creepy.
Years ago, when I was a kid, I used to go trick-or-treating with my friend Michael every Halloween. Afterwards, we would hang out and eat our candy that we got while watching scary movies. On this one year, Michael and I went trick-or-treating around my neighborhood, which was pretty big, and afterwards we got back to my house. Then we put on a movie, and the plan was for Michael to spend the night. Shortly after we got home, my mom, who was the only other person home, said she was going to bed. It was only 9 p.m., but she had work early the next morning. We were watching a scary movie in the living room after that, and got probably about 30 minutes into it when I heard a knock coming from the front door. It really startled me because of the fact that we were watching a scary film. Then, I remembered how it was Halloween, and I stopped being scared because I figured it was just a trick-or-treater, so I started to walk towards the door. But as I got closer, I remembered how late it was, almost 10 p.m., and there weren't really people trick-or-treating out this late. I decided to just take a look out of the window first to see who it was. I peeked out from behind the blinds and saw a creepy-looking man standing at the front door. He looked pretty tall and was skinny with a little beard. He also had sunglasses on, but didn't appear to be in any kind of costume. I had a bad feeling about it, so I decided not to answer the door, and Michael, who was still on the couch, asked me who it was. I told him a creepy-looking dude was there and I wasn't answering. I watched as the man looked around for a little while and then finally walked away. I was really happy to see him go because as a 12-year-old kid I got scared pretty easy. I went back and resumed the movie, but I would say just about 10 minutes later we heard a knock coming from the door once again. We ignored it until they knocked again at a louder volume. I wanted to call my mom, but I knew she was sleeping and had to be up early for work, so I didn't. Michael and I both walked quietly over to the window this time and looked out. But as soon as we pulled the blinds back, we saw the man standing at our front step looking directly at us. I made eye contact with the man, who had an angry look on his face. We quickly covered the window back up and ran away back to the living room. We were just hoping that the man would decide to go away, but instead, we heard the knocking once again, but not at the door this time. Now it moved to the window where we had been looking out of. We couldn't see him from the blinds, but we knew that he was right on the other side. I was starting to freak out, but Michael said maybe it was just some guy trying to scare people on Halloween. I hoped that was the case, and the knocking from the man moved from one window to another. He seemed to be making his way around the house to the back. Then we didn't hear anything for a short time. All Michael and I could really do was sit there and listen. Then suddenly, we heard the loud sound of glass being broken. It sounded like it was coming from the back of the house at one of the basement windows. When we heard this, Michael and I both went running upstairs to my mom's room like 5-year-olds. When we got upstairs, we woke her up and told her someone had just broken into the house. My mom got out her phone and called the police, and also locked the door to her bedroom. Michael and I hid under her bed while we heard her talking on the phone to the police. Then we just had to wait for the police to arrive. We heard the man walking around downstairs, but he never came up the stairs. Eventually, we stopped hearing him, and by the time the police showed up, he was gone.
One Halloween night, when I was 15 years old, my friends and I went trick-or-treating. We were fairly old to be trick-or-treating, but we decided that it would be fun to have one last year going door to door together. We started out in our neighborhood, but we weren't getting much. We agreed to make the trek over to the rich neighborhood, which was known for giving away king-sized candy in the past. The quickest route to the rich neighborhood was a shortcut including a path through a section of the woods. My friends and I had taken this path many times before to go to other friends' houses who lived in that neighborhood. Personally, I had only been on the path during the daytime though, and I was a bit nervous to walk through a longer stretch of woods at night. However, the majority of the group didn't want to waste precious trick-or-treating time by taking the long way there, so we ended up taking the shortcut through the woods. As we entered the woods, the light and noise from the neighborhood behind us eventually faded, leaving the only sound of us crunching our way through the leaves in the forest and talking. Over the talking of the group, I thought I heard something behind us though. I heard the crunching of leaves, sounding like footsteps, but maybe it was an animal. I swung the flashlight behind us, but I saw nothing there. However, by doing this, I did get the attention of the group. Everybody fell silent and stopped walking, turning around to see what I was looking at. I explained that I thought I heard footsteps crunching in the leaves behind us, but that I didn't see anything. We chalked it up to an animal and continued walking, but we all stayed pretty quiet now, whispering amongst ourselves. A few moments later, the noise happened again. This time, everyone in the group heard it, and we whirled around to see two men dressed in all black off the path and a bit in the woods. This was enough to send the group running as fast as we could, wanting to get out of the forest. We didn't dare to look back, but we could hear the two men now crashing through the forest behind us on the path. It sounded like they were gaining on us, but we all made it out of the woods and back into the neighborhood scene just in time. Once we were back in the neighborhood, we hung around for a bit to see if the two men would emerge from the woods, but they never did. Maybe we just happened upon two guys in the woods, and they decided to play a prank on us, but it was all very strange. Since we were only 15 at the time with no adults around, it definitely felt like a dangerous situation.
This happened my freshman year of college. I went to a pretty big university, and over time, I met a decent amount of people and had a few groups of friends that I would hang out with. By the time Halloween rolled around my freshman year, I had plans to go out with some of my friends. I dressed up as a nerd and we went out to a few of the bars around campus. As it got later, a few of my friends wanted to go to one of the bars in town that was pretty strict. Being 19 at the time, I figured I wouldn't get in. I told them they should go ahead, and I Snapchatted a few of my other friends asking what they were doing. One of my friends named John told me about a party he had been invited to. He said it was supposed to be really big and asked if I wanted to go with. To me, this was perfect because I wasn't tired yet and still wanted to hang out with people. I told him I'd go, and I walked to the edge of campus and met up with him. We then walked a few blocks to where the address was that John told me. We saw what appeared to be the house. We could just barely hear the music coming from inside and saw a kid wearing a basketball jersey and sunglasses sitting out front drinking a beer. We walked up and John greeted the kid, who I guess knew him. He introduced me and the kid said his name was Jake. Then we both walked inside the house, and the first thing we noticed was a little entryway filled with shoes. We took off ours, and then we went through another doorway into a room where we saw a speaker blaring music, but nobody was in the room. Immediately, I got a bad feeling, and as I started to walk forward to the next room, I heard footsteps coming from behind us. John and I turned around and saw two large men enter the room with baseball bats. They had on ski masks over their faces, so I couldn't tell anything about them, but they appeared to be well over 6 feet tall. One of the men shouted that they would hurt us unless we did what they said. Then they ordered us to go into the next room that appeared to be at the back end of the house. I was terrified, and John looked stunned and pretty scared as well. The next room appeared to be the kitchen. There was a little table with a chair there, and it also had a stove and a sink, then the back door to the house. There was also a wooden door cracked open that led to the basement, which is where the two men told us to go. They stood about 6 feet behind us with their bats in their right hand and their left hands pointing. As we were walking towards the door, John nudged me, and just as I looked at him, he suddenly darted for the back kitchen door, which I saw him pull the lock back and open it all in the blink of an eye. Without even really thinking, I followed him and ran as quick as I could to the door. I had a strong rush of adrenaline as I did, and I heard the men behind us start to yell and run after us. I literally rammed into John as he ran out the door, and I almost tripped over him. As I was almost out the door, I could hear the men getting closer and felt the back of my right leg get hit with probably a baseball bat. It got me in my upper right calf, and it hurt really bad, but the adrenaline kept me going out the door, and I followed John around the side of the house. The longer we ran, the more my leg throbbed, but we seemed to get a little bit farther away from the men who were behind us, and as we passed by two garbage cans that were on the side of the house, I pushed one of them over to try to slow the men down. John started yelling as he ran, and by the time we reached the street, we didn't notice the men chasing us anymore. I ran with John all the way back to campus before I basically collapsed from being tired and the pain from my leg. We called the police and then told them the address of the house and everything. Apparently by the time they showed up, nobody was there, and the house was vacant at the time, but was owned by a guy who typically rented to students. I'm sure that John and I narrowly avoided something terrible that night, and I had a really sore leg for a few weeks, but other than that I was fine.
A few years back, on Halloween when I was a freshman in high school, my best friend George came over to hang out. My mother is a nurse and was working night shifts at the time, so we were home alone. I made us a frozen pizza and we played some video games while trick-or-treaters would ring the doorbell every so often. The neighborhood I lived in was decently busy, so my mother left a big bowl of candy for us to pass out. We pretty much did just those things until the trick-or-treaters stopped at around 10 p.m. At that point, I turned off all the lights in the house, made some popcorn, and put on a scary movie. We watched it, and afterwards we weren't tired yet, so we decided to put on another scary film. At about midnight, shortly into the second film, I heard the bush behind the living room window moving and a scratch against the window. I'm not gonna lie, it really freaked me out. I told myself I was just paranoid, but then George said, "What was that?" and looked at me. I looked to the window, but it was too dark to really see anything, and had blinds covering up a good portion of it. I said it was probably nothing, and we focused our attention back on the TV. 10 minutes later, just when I was forgetting about all the noise, we heard something else. This time, it was the sound of tapping on the back window of the house. I said once again that it was probably nothing, but me and George were both pretty freaked out. We paused the movie and walked over to the kitchen area, which is where the noise came from, and glanced out the window. It was dark, but we saw nothing, so we went back into the living room. We unpaused the movie, but this time I was more freaked out than before, and I was feeling very paranoid. A couple of minutes later, we heard the sound of glass being shattered coming from the kitchen. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. Without hesitation, me and George both ran downstairs into the basement bathroom and locked the door. We didn't know exactly what had happened, but we figured that somebody broke into the house. George took out his phone and we called the police. They said they would arrive within 10 minutes, and they stayed on the line with us. The lady on the line told us to remain calm, but it was pretty tough. We heard a couple of doors open upstairs, and sometimes would hear footsteps, but other than that we really couldn't hear anything. Then we heard the door to the basement open. We didn't hear anything after that, but me and George were definitely not going to open the door in fear that somebody was down there with us. We just sat there on the bathroom floor, trying not to make a sound, and waited. The wait felt like such a long time, and finally we heard a knocking on the front door and somebody announced they were police. On the count of 3, George and I both made a run for it upstairs and to the front door. Once we were there, we went outside and spoke to a couple of officers, while other officers searched our house. The man was gone though, and a few things were messed up and stolen inside. My mother returned home shortly after that, and George's parents came and picked him up. It was the scariest Halloween for sure.
When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends. Halloween this particular year landed on a Saturday, so I was up late by myself in the living room watching TV. Late that night, as I was drifting in and out of sleep watching TV, I heard a noise from the front porch. It was the sound of the old swing creaking back and forth, and it could have been the wind, but I was paranoid as a young kid and I went to check it out. Cautiously, I crept to the window by the porch and I looked outside, and what I saw was horrifying. An older woman, probably in her 50s, was sitting on our swing. She was wearing nothing but a nightgown and her skin was smeared with blood. In her hand, she held a large kitchen knife. I felt like I was dreaming, but it was all too real. I was only 7 at the time, so I sprinted to my parents' room yelling and crying that there was a scary woman outside. My dad woke up first and asked me to calm down and explain what happened. I stuttered in between the breaks in my crying that there was a woman on the porch with a knife. My dad's expression shifted from confusion to frustration. He thought that I was imagining things, and he told me it was probably a bad dream, saying that I could sleep in their room for the rest of the night if I wanted. I wouldn't let it go though, and finally I managed to convince him to get out of bed and go check the porch. When we reached the door, he unlocked it and swung it open, ready to show me nothing was there, despite my pleas to not open the door or go outside. My dad even started to say, "See, there's nothing out there," when he saw the lady who was still sitting on the porch swing. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw her. She turned slowly, staring at us with wild eyes. For a moment, everything was silent, and then my dad slammed the door shut and locked it. After telling my mom, who was now awake, to call the police, he rushed to grab his gun. When my dad returned to the door, he cracked it just enough to the point the barrel of the shotgun could go outside, and he asked the woman what she was doing and to get off our porch. The woman didn't move. Instead, she just looked at us. She finally uttered something towards my dad after a while. "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me," she said. Her voice was trembling. My dad had no idea how to respond, and he just said that the police were on the way and could help her once they get there. She glanced down the street, then back at us, panic flashing across her face. She spun around and took off, disappearing into the night. My dad quickly closed the door, locking it again, and I heard him shout for my mom to keep the phone ready. He stood there until the police arrived, listening, eyes darting around as if he expected her to come back at any moment. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. They searched the area and eventually found her trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. Apparently, she was crazy and off of her medication. She'd gotten into a fight with her husband and attacked him with a knife, but did not seriously hurt him. When he was able to push her out of the house, she cut herself with the knife, either trying to hurt herself or make it look like her husband did it. The police never talked to us about it, so that's just the story that we heard from the woman's neighbors. It was by far the scariest Halloween of my life so far, and after that night, I've never slept out in the living room again. The thought of that woman with the knife haunted me, and I was paranoid for most of my childhood of being in the living room late at night and hearing the sound of the porch swing moving.
A couple of years back, me and my friend Sam went trick-or-treating together. I think we were probably about 12 or 13 at the time. Sam's older brother drove us to the neighborhood that was a couple of miles away because our neighborhood was small, and apparently this one gave the most candy. We got out of Sam's brother's car, and he told us he would pick us up when we were done. We started going house to house and getting candy. I had never been to that neighborhood before, but I had to admit it didn't disappoint. People were very nice, and we stayed there for almost 2 hours until we reached the end. There were a few more houses on a quieter road a ways down, so we decided to finish with those. Most of the houses there looked a little more run down, and many had their lights off, indicating that we shouldn't go there. Then we reached the house on the end of that street. It had its lights off, but the front door appeared to be open. We were literally turning around and starting to walk back when we saw a man peek his head out from inside the house and waved us over. We started walking to the man. This house was pretty run down as well, and had a decent-sized yard with long grass and some trees and bushes scattered around the yard. We walked up the driveway and down a sidewalk up to the front porch. Just as we were starting to walk up the steps to the house, I heard a bush that was about 10 feet away start to move. I looked over to it and saw a tall man walking towards us. When I looked at him, he had a terrible look to his face that just really gave me the creeps. He wore dirty clothes, had a scruffy beard, and messy hair. At this same time, the man emerged from the house and started walking towards us. Sam took off running, and I did the same. The men ran after us, but only for a short distance. We were easily able to outrun them. We sprinted all the way back to the first neighborhood, where Sam called his brother, and he came and picked us up. We told Sam's brother what had happened, and he insisted that it was just a Halloween prank to scare us, and then he wanted to drive us back to the house. We begged him not to, but he insisted and assured us that it was fine. I guessed that maybe it could have been a prank, but judging by the look on that man's face, I really didn't think it was. We directed Sam's brother back to the house, and he pulled up on the street across from it a few minutes later. He told us to wait there and he would go talk to the man. Then he walked up the driveway to the house. We watched from the car as Sam's brother knocked on the door. Then we saw Sam's brother slowly open the door and walk inside. Less than a minute later, we saw him sprint out of the house and back to the car. He got in and drove us right back, telling us that we were right. When we got back to Sam's house, his brother finally told us that when he got to the front door and knocked on it, he noticed it wasn't shut all the way, so he looked inside and saw that the house was completely empty. He said it was very run down and appeared to be vacant for quite some time. He had stepped inside to look around and then heard footsteps coming from around the corner, so he took off running. We never trick-or-treated there again.
When I was a kid, I used to go trick-or-treating with my best friend Michael every year. One time in particular stands out when we were about 10 years old. It was just the two of us going, and we had no parent supervision. We both felt that we were old enough to go by ourselves. Plus, the area that we lived in was generally pretty safe. Michael and I started out at my house and left pretty early. First, we went around the houses in my neighborhood and then headed to Michael's. We could walk to his house, and it was about 10 minutes to do that. I guess technically we lived in the same neighborhood, but it seemed like a different one as a kid. That general area had so many houses, so we saw quite a few other kids trick-or-treating throughout the night. Some kids were with parents, and others were on their own like us. I remember at one point, maybe a couple of hours in, walking down the street and seeing a few random kids and this one guy. The guy was wearing all black pants and a black shirt, and then he had a pumpkin mask on which covered his entire head. It was really creepy looking. We kept on going, and we went to all of the houses around Michael's neighborhood. Sometime later, towards the end of the night, as we were still sort of by Michael's house, we saw this pumpkin man again. He was walking alone in the street, a ways back from us. There were no other kids around anymore other than us in this particular area. We had seen the guy a long ways away before this, and we were both sure that he was an adult. We both started to take notice of him a little bit more. As we went up driveways to trick-or-treat, the guy stayed in the street, but when we progressed down the street, he seemed to do so as well. It was like he was walking in the street following us, but at an extremely slow pace. We didn't know who he was either. Maybe he was just a random guy who decided to dress up and walk the streets. To be honest though, he was starting to scare me, and Michael didn't seem to like it either. We soon decided to be done and head back. It was beginning to get late, and our legs were tired from all the walking. We turned at the next street, which we had already visited every house on. We were going to walk back down it, and then would only have to walk down a couple of more streets. After entering the street, soon after, we saw the pumpkin man again. He must have sped up significantly to get to that street so quickly. He had been a lot further back before. But now that he was on the street, he was still walking really slow. The guy was not looking at us, but kind of slowly walking an indirect route down the street and looking down at the ground. Michael and I started walking faster, trying to make it back. When we got to the end of that street and turned, the man behind us soon did the same. By now, he was still a long ways back, but seemingly following us. We were considering making a run for it, but felt like we didn't have to do that just yet. I started talking to Michael about random stuff like sports and the candy that we got to distract myself. And it actually started to work, because after about 5 minutes of walking and talking about stuff, I forgot about the guy. But then I happened to look behind us and noticed the man was much closer now. He was still walking slowly, but had closed the distance on us by almost half. Now he was maybe 50 feet away. When Michael and I saw this, we both looked at each other in horror. Who was this guy, and what was he doing? At that point, we couldn't take it anymore, and we both just started running. We had made it a good distance of the way back, and were almost at Michael's street. Soon, we got to it and didn't even bother looking behind us. At last, when we made it to Michael's, we ran through the front yard and inside his house. When we got in the house, we looked out the window. The pumpkin man casually walked down the street and past Michael's house. But just before going out of our sight, he stopped and then turned to face us. Then he waved before leaving. Michael and I were terrified, but he was gone now. We never saw that man again, and none of us knew who he was. Maybe he was one of our neighbors, but to this day, I have no clue. All I know is that he scared us badly that night.
This happened back when I was a kid. I think I was 12 years old at the time, and it was about 20 years ago now. Halloween was one of my favorite holidays. I loved getting to hang out with my friends, put on some funny costume, and then go out and get a bunch of candy. This particular year, I remember that my friend Sean was coming over, and he was going trick-or-treating with me.
Afterwards, he was going to sleep over at my house. I lived with just my mom and older sister, who was at her best friend's house. Sean and I left to go trick-or-treating at probably 5 p.m. I would describe the neighborhood that I lived in as pretty typical. There were quite a few other houses on my street, and we lived in a large residential area. My street itself was usually pretty quiet though, but we would still get lots of neighborhood kids trick-or-treating. Sean and I first went to all the houses on my street, and then we went to the next street over. We ended up spending hours trick-or-treating until our bags couldn't hold any more candy. I would say it was about 8 o'clock when we decided to head back to my house. During the entire time that we had been trick-or-treating, everything seemed pretty normal. We saw a bunch of other kids out trick-or-treating as well. It took maybe 30 minutes or so to walk back home, but eventually we got there. After getting back inside, Sean and I started going through all of the candy that we got. I remember that not long after, my mom went up to go to bed. Sean and I didn't have school the next day, so we were going to stay up late. We went into the living room and started playing video games. Probably PlayStation 2 or whatever was big back then. There were a lot of fun multiplayer games that we played, and we could do that for hours. But only like 10 minutes into it, the doorbell rang. Of course, Sean and I both assumed that it was a trick-or-treater, but it was pretty late for one. Plus, my mom had turned out the front light before going to bed. We looked at the time, and it was a little after 10 o'clock. This was definitely late for somebody to be trick-or-treating, but it was still a strong possibility. We paused the game, and I got up to check who it was. Sean followed me, but we both stopped to look out the front window from the living room first. We could see out to the front step if we moved the curtains a little bit. When I did, I saw that there was a fully grown man standing there facing the front door. It was not a kid or a trick-or-treater. The man had no costume on of any kind, and I didn't recognize him as a neighbor or anybody that I knew either. After seeing him, we quickly closed the curtains to the window, fearing that the man might look over and see us. We weren't really sure what to do, but decided to just ignore this. We didn't know what the man wanted, but it seemed weird for him to be there. Obviously, I wasn't going to answer the door late at night to some weirdo. The guy rang the doorbell one more time. I was kind of hoping that my mom was still awake and would come downstairs, but she didn't. After the doorbell rang for the second time, things were quiet for a while after that. Sean and I assumed that the man must have left. I felt a little bit better, and we were about to go back to playing video games, but Sean had the idea to check out the window to make sure that the guy was now gone. I agreed and walked over to the window. I pulled back the curtain to look out, but when I did, I saw the man was right there on the other side of the window. He looked right at me as I saw him, and I quickly closed the curtains again. Sean and I both sprinted out of the room and upstairs to get away from there. We went into my bedroom and closed the door behind us. I was really scared, but I felt like we would be safe up there. We didn't know what the man was doing in our yard or right next to the window, but I was hoping that he would just go away. Sean and I were talking to each other about what we had just seen, when suddenly, we heard the sound of glass breaking coming from downstairs. When I heard this, I got 100 times more scared than I already was. Sean and I both ran out of my bedroom and down the hall to my mom's bedroom. When we got inside, she woke up and I told her what was going on. There was a phone in her bedroom and she started to call the police. I went over and locked the bedroom door. There was a phone in her bedroom and she picked it up to call the police. I went over and locked the bedroom door. Then we all went into the closet of the bedroom and got inside of it. We didn't hear any noises, but the guy was downstairs somewhere. It felt like forever as we waited for the police to arrive. I was just hoping that we wouldn't hear the sound of somebody walking down the hallway or the sound of somebody at the door. None of us had any idea who this guy was or why he was here. After waiting for probably 10 or 15 minutes, the police finally got there. They searched the house, but the guy had left. He had broken the front living room window, right by where we had seen him. Several parts of the house downstairs had things messed up, and a couple of items were stolen. We were mostly just happy that the guy was gone, though. I'm not sure why he broke into the house. I was pretty scared for the rest of the night and thought that the guy might come back, but luckily he didn't. That was definitely my scariest Halloween memory.
Last Halloween, my sister and I threw a Halloween party at our house. We were both fairly popular college girls, and we knew there would be a lot of people to come to the party. We decorated our place up a little bit and then put on our costumes. Our close friends were the first people to show up at about 5 p.m., and then slowly more and more people came. Eventually, our house had about 100 college kids in it, all wearing costumes. It was a pretty fun time, until one of my friends came up to me and complained about a man dressed up in an Albert Einstein costume who was annoying some of the girls. I looked around the room until I saw the guy. He was wearing a full mask, so I had no clue as to who he was. He was standing in the corner of the room, so I walked over to him. He looked at me, and I asked who he was. He didn't answer at all and didn't say a word. It was pretty loud in there, so I walked into the kitchen, which was empty, and he followed me in. I told him some people were complaining about him and asked him again who he was. He still just stood there and didn't say anything. Then I told him he should leave. I wasn't sure if it was one of my friends trying to be funny or just a random kid. Then he started to approach me and got very close. I felt uncomfortable and I left the room to get my friend Jack. I told him about the guy and asked if he knew who he was. Jack said he didn't know him at all. We both went back to see if we could find the Einstein guy, but he seemed to be gone. We looked around a little bit, but didn't see him anywhere, so we figured he left, and I was very relieved. The rest of the party was pretty fun, and people started to leave at about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was pretty tired at that point, and before long, it was just my sister, me, and a few of our close friends at the house. We hung out for a little while, and then I went upstairs to go to bed. I got ready for bed, and then turned out the light and got under the covers. I closed my eyes and was starting to drift off to sleep when I heard my closet door open. I opened my eyes and looked in the direction of my closet. I saw the guy in the Albert Einstein mask coming out of the closet and walking towards me. As he did, he removed his mask. It wasn't a college kid at all. It was a man who looked to be about 40 or 50 years old. He had grayish hair and a scruffy beard. I screamed as loud as I could like a little girl. The man had the creepiest smile on his face that I'd ever seen. When he got to my bed, I got up and ran to the corner of the room. He started to follow after me. I heard my friends coming upstairs at that point. Thankfully, they were still at my house. My friends Jack and Ben ran to the man and pulled him away from me. There was a little bit of a struggle, but they were both easily able to overpower him. They ended up holding him there until the police came. A short while later, the man was arrested. I'm lucky that my friends were still there to help me that night.
Close to the town I live in, there was an old and abandoned house out in the country. It was a bit of a drive out of town, so a lot of people in my school talked about it, but they rarely ever went out to it. One Halloween, however, a friend of mine who had his license decided that he wanted to go out and see the house that year. It didn't take very much to convince the rest of our friend group to come along. There were 6 of us all together cramped into the car, and we waited until after dark to go out there to make it scarier since it was Halloween night. All of us got out to the car after we pulled into the yard of the house. The yard was pretty big, and there were tons of overgrown plants. There were no lights from nearby houses or street lights, so the only light was the flashlights that we brought with us. We started walking up to the house slowly from the car. My friend kept shining his light ahead of us up onto the house. I watched as he moved his light on the house, checking out different parts of it. I stopped though when I saw something on the porch of the house. Although I only caught a glimpse of it as his light hit it, it seemed out of place. I checked out what I had seen with my own flashlight, and there on the porch was a pumpkin. It wasn't an old decaying pumpkin that we would have expected to see in an abandoned house either. I told my friends that somebody might be living here inside the house since there was a freshly carved pumpkin. My friends shrugged it off though, saying it was Halloween and some other kids probably put it there as a joke. We decided to continue and were still walking when I heard a noise off from the side of the house. I shined my light over in the area just in time to catch somebody coming up to the side of the house. There was a man on the side of the house who I caught creeping around the corner of it. He was already watching us when the light hit him, and he had a huge knife in his hand. Once the man's position had been revealed, he began to come towards us as fast as he could. I say that he went as fast as he could because the man wasn't moving very well. He was doing a half hobble, half run towards us, like he was injured or missing part of his leg. Fortunately, all my friends had seen him by now, and we all turned and began running very quickly back towards the car. I looked back as I was getting myself into the car to see that the guy was still coming after us. As we pulled away from the house, two of my friends were laughing, saying that they had set the whole thing up. They said they had gotten a kid from school to head out earlier and wait for us so he could come and scare us. I had been the only person to really get a good view of the man who was chasing us, and I knew for a fact that it was not a high schooler. I insisted upon it, telling my friends that whoever it was not the person that they had sent out there to scare us. Sure enough, the two friends who had set up the scare checked their phones to find voicemails and texts from the kid who was supposed to scare us. He had been at the house, but never got the chance to pretend to attack us because the same guy had gone after him, so he left immediately. He had left voicemails and texts saying to abort and to not go to the abandoned house, but they hadn't seen them due to bad cell service. We had no idea who tried to attack us that night or why, and when the police investigated, they found nobody there.
This happened a few years ago on Halloween. I'm 28 years old, and most people in my friend group get together for a Halloween party the weekend of Halloween. On this year, Halloween was on a weeknight, so our party was later in the week. That meant I didn't have anything going on Halloween. I live in a smaller house and was just planning on hanging out and giving out candy to trick-or-treaters all night. By the time it got to be about 5 o'clock, the first trick-or-treaters arrived. I would say my neighborhood is pretty average. I don't get a crazy number of people, but a steady amount throughout the night. As time went on, the sun set a little after 6 o'clock or so. It was around this time when I was in my living room and heard a knock on the front door. It was a strong and powerful knock. Most people rang the doorbell, so I really noticed this. I was a little bit slow to get up and get to the door, and by the time I did, nobody was there. I felt bad because some kid must have missed out on getting candy from me, and I meant to answer the door a little bit sooner. I looked around to see if I could see anybody walking down the street, but I didn't. After that, I went back inside. I got a few more kids at the door over the next hour or so, and once again, there was another loud knock on the door after that. I was much quicker to answer the door, but again, nobody was there. Now I was beginning to think that I was being pranked or something. When it got later in the night, it happened yet again. It was the only time people knocked on the door, too. Everybody else would just ring the doorbell, so I knew when I heard the knock, whoever had done it would be gone by the time I answered. The last trick-or-treaters came by at about 8:45 or so, and by 9 o'clock, things were really quiet. At that point, I turned my lights off, signaling that I wouldn't want any more trick-or-treaters. It was about 9:30 when I heard the knocking yet again. I ran to the door and opened it as fast as I could. Still, nobody was there. I was pretty annoyed by this now. Who would have time to repeatedly knock on my door over the span of 3 or 4 hours just to run away before I could answer? I left my house and took a couple of steps out into my yard looking all around. I didn't see anybody. I called out asking who was there, but of course got no response. I shook my head and started walking back into my house. When I reached my front step, I suddenly heard a noise in the bushes directly in front of my house and to my right. When I looked, I was just in time to see somebody emerge from the bush and was headed straight for me. This person was a grown man, and I had never seen him before. I had maybe 10 feet between him and the front door. I ran as fast as I could, pretty much just as a reaction. When I reached the door, I swung it back open and got inside. I closed the door right behind me, and it closed right on the man's arm who was trying to get inside after me. This was just my screen door, so it didn't hurt him too bad, but it was enough to cause him to remove his arm from the door and back outside. This gave me enough time to slam the larger door and lock it, right before he opened the screen door and tried coming into my house. I screamed that I was calling the police, and then got my phone out of my pocket to do so. I looked out the window, and I watched the man running away through my yard and then down the street, but I called the police anyways. When they arrived, I told them all I could, and this was thankfully enough to keep the man away, because I never saw him again.
2013, my best friend Lindsay and I went trick-or-treating together. I dressed up as Harley Quinn from Batman, and Lindsay was Minnie Mouse. We hung out at my house for a while, and we took some photos together, then we left. We planned on going to Lindsay's house after to hang out, because my parents were going to a Halloween party at their friend's house. We went trick-or-treating around the neighborhood, which had a decent number of kids out. I remember seeing somebody dressed up in a full skeleton costume complete with a mask, walking down the street passing us. He went the other direction and waved at us. We waved back and kept going. About 20 minutes later at a house, I saw the same skeleton guy behind us walking up the driveway. I thought it was a little strange, but we kept going. We stayed out maybe another hour trick-or-treating, and the skeleton guy seemed to be behind us the entire time. We didn't think much of it still, until we decided to call it a night and head back to Lindsay's house to hang out. When we started walking back, the skeleton guy started walking back too. By this time, there wasn't many other trick-or-treaters out at all, so we were a little concerned of who this guy was. He seemed pretty big, and we thought he was maybe in high school or something. We walked all the way back to Lindsay's house, which took us half an hour, and the guy trailed us about 50 feet behind the entire way. The longer he followed us, the more creeped out we became, and I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence. At last, we finally reached Lindsay's house and went inside. Her parents were home, and we felt a lot safer. We stayed at the window to make sure he went out of sight. Then we told Lindsay's parents about it, but they assured us it was just a coincidence and he probably lived down the street. Me and Lindsay went up to her room then and forgot all about the man. We watched a scary movie and had some candy. Then it got pretty late. It was a Thursday night and a school night, so I decided to head back home. My house was only about a 5-minute walk away, so I left and began walking down the street. I was kind of spooked from the movie and it being Halloween night, and not long into the walk, I started hearing footsteps from the other side of the road. I looked behind me, but I didn't see anything. I kept walking until I started hearing the footsteps again, and they seemed to be getting closer. I turned around and saw the skeleton man about 40 feet away on the other side of the road. At this point, I was very close to my house, so I made a run for it and sprinted down the street, through a neighbor's backyard and into my own backyard. Then I unlocked the back door and went inside. The whole time I didn't look behind me, and I didn't want to know if I had been chased or not. When I got inside, I was disappointed to see that my parents still weren't home yet, so I was home alone. I went around to make sure that all of the doors were locked to make me feel safer. As I was at the front of my house, I heard somebody at the back door of my house trying to open it. I just about had a heart attack, and I knew it was the skeleton man. I slowly walked to the corner and looked around it to the back door. As soon as I did, I made direct eye contact with the guy. I ran back around the corner. As soon as I did, I saw he was looking right at me. I ran back around the corner to the living room and grabbed the phone to call the police. The guy kept trying the doorknob the entire time. The lady on the line told me the police should arrive within 5 minutes. This made me feel a little better, but I was still terrified. I ran upstairs to my bedroom and locked the door. Then I called my parents. I told them what was going on, and they told me they were on their way home. I just sat in my room waiting for the police to arrive. I was starting to feel a little better until I heard movement downstairs from inside the house. My heart dropped. I knew it would only be a matter of time before he came upstairs. I ran to my closet and hid inside of it. Then I plugged my ears and closed my eyes. I waited for what felt like forever until I heard loud shouting coming from down the hall. I uncovered one ear to see who was shouting, and when I heard multiple voices, I knew it was the police. I slowly left my closet and went to my door and cracked it open. There was the man in the skeleton costume being held by police in my hallway about 20 feet away. His mask was off his face now, and it revealed that he was at least 30 years old if I had to guess. They took him away and started asking me questions. My parents arrived back about 5 minutes later. It made for a really late night, and my parents let me stay home from school the next day. That was by far the scariest Halloween for me.
This story takes place in the fall of 2013 when I was 10. I know I was young, but I still remember almost every detail about it because of how vivid of a memory it is in my mind. It was Halloween, and like most other kids, I really liked to put on Halloween costumes and go trick-or-treating. I decided to go as a football player that year, and I had shoulder pads and everything for my uniform. After I got back from school that day, my mom made me finish my homework before I went out trick-or-treating. Luckily for me, it didn't take too long, and I got a pretty early start. I was determined to get as much candy as I possibly could. I would get really competitive with my older sister, who's 1.5 years older than me, and I would always try to get more candy than she did. She had gone to her friend's house, and they were going trick-or-treating together in another neighborhood. My family and I lived in a pretty standard neighborhood, quite a few houses and different streets to go to. In some streets, the houses were closer together, and in others, they had a little more land and bigger yards, and the houses were farther apart. To me, it always seemed like the streets where the houses were farther apart would take longer to get to all of them, but the people would usually give out more candy because less kids came to their doors. I basically just went to every single street that I possibly could, and ended up going to a few different neighborhoods. I had an iPod Touch at the time, and that's what I would use to keep track of the clock. My mom had told me to be back by 8:30, and by the time it was 8:15, my bag was nearly overflowing with candy. I was sort of far from home, but I was pretty sure I knew my way back. In fact, I don't think I had ever been to that particular street that I was on before. There had been a good amount of other kids that I had seen out, but by now the streets were pretty much empty. I was on a quieter street where the houses had more land and were farther apart from one another. I figured I should get back when I was done with this one. When I reached the end of the street, there was one last house. This had by far the longest driveway of any of them, and I made up my mind that this would be the final one I would go to before going home. I was already going to be late from when my mom told me to come back, but I couldn't resist trying to get as much candy as I could. I walked up the long driveway to this house. The house itself was really big, and I was hoping this meant lots of candy. The driveway sort of curved and also went uphill. There were a good number of trees in the yard as well, and it looked sort of spooky. I reached the top and walked up to the front step, where I noticed something strange. The front door to the house was actually open. It was open almost all the way. I looked around the front step and around the front yard, but didn't see anybody or anything. It was strange, and I figured that maybe I should just leave. I was feeling sort of uncomfortable by it, and right as I started to turn around, I heard noises coming from the bushes in front of the step. I saw a large man emerge who was wearing all black and a ski mask over his head. He was going straight towards me, as if he was trying to get me to go inside the house. My only reaction was to run away through his yard to the side, and I narrowly missed his arm reaching for me. I sprinted away with my bag of candy, and I remember some candy falling out of my bag as I ran, but I didn't even care. The guy was chasing after me through the front yard, and I was hoping he would stop when we got to the street, but he didn't. I kept on running back down the street, with the guy running after me the whole time. I was fast, but so was he, and he maintained probably about 10 feet behind me. I ran through somebody else's yard and into their backyard, thinking this guy would give up, but he didn't. He just kept chasing me. Part of me thought it was a joke or a scary prank for him to chase me through his yard. I got scared sort of easy as a kid, but I really felt like this was no longer any kind of prank. I was literally running through random people's backyards with this guy doing the same thing. Eventually, I made it back out to the street, and the guy was still after me. He chased me for probably like 5 blocks, and finally, when I was almost back in my neighborhood, he just stopped. I kept on looking back, and I saw the man stand right in the middle of the street facing me, but he just stood there. I kept running, and was thinking he was going to start chasing me again, but he didn't. I ran all the rest of the way home. When I got home, my mom saw how I was out of breath and asked what had happened. I told my parents all about it, but they were convinced that it was just some prank. Still, after all these years, I don't think it was a prank. What was the point of trying to chase me into the house or going almost all the way back to my neighborhood? I never went back to that street again.
This story took place 2 years ago. It was Halloween evening at about 6 or 7 p.m., and I was at my house watching TV. As I went to the kitchen to get some food, I noticed a man dressed up with one of those horse head masks on, walking up my driveway. I live a little bit out in the country, and the houses are pretty far apart. Because of this, I have never received a single trick-or-treater the entire 5 years I've been living here, so this really surprised me. In fact, I didn't have any candy in the house at all, because I wasn't expecting anybody. I looked around my kitchen to see if maybe I had something I could give the kid, but I saw nothing. I felt bad, and I decided to just go tell him that I was sorry, but I didn't have anything to give him. As I walked towards my front door, I heard the knob start to turn. It jiggled a bit, and then I heard pressure against the door, as if whoever was there was trying to enter my house. Then I heard him walk away, and I saw him from the window walking through my yard to the side of my house. He no longer seemed like some innocent trick-or-treater. Now I was a little bit concerned. I stepped out of the house and looked around, but he was gone to the side where I couldn't see him. I went back inside and made sure that all of my windows and doors were locked. Then I looked out of some of the windows, but I didn't see anything. After that, I went back to watching TV, but was ready to call the police if I needed to. A few hours went by and nothing happened. Then at about 10 p.m., there was a single doorbell ring at my front door. I slowly walked over to it and looked out the window, but nobody was there. I was beginning to get annoyed, and I opened the door and shouted that if there was any more of this nonsense, I would call the police. Thankfully, nothing else happened for the rest of the night. However, when I woke up the next morning, I looked out my window, and I saw that hanging on a tree branch directly facing my bedroom was the horse face mask that the person had been wearing the night before. It was a pretty creepy thing to see.
This happened when I was a kid, about 10 years old or so. Halloween was one of my favorite times of the year. I would always go trick-or-treating with my best friend Aaron, and we lived pretty close to each other in the same neighborhood. On this year in particular, on the evening of Halloween, Aaron came over and we got ready to trick-or-treat. I can't remember what our costumes were, but we set out and first hit all the houses on our street. We lived in a large neighborhood, but our street was really small. I think there were like 10 or 12 houses on it, and surrounding it was a large park and a golf course. Then to get to the rest of the houses, you had to cross a busier street. We got all the houses on our street within like 15 minutes. Then my mom told my older sister to drive us to the other neighborhood. We obviously wanted to go there so that we could get more candy. And one spot in particular had nice houses that were really large, and so the owners gave out way more stuff. My sister was 16 or 17 at the time, so she could drive, and we got in the old minivan that she drove to school. She drove Aaron and I to the nice neighborhood, and we began going to all the houses. Our plan was to just go to as many houses as possible until it got too late. We each had a pillowcase for our candy, and we ended up getting a ton. My sister would drop us off at the street, and then she would drive to the end of it and just park. Once we got to her, she would drive us to the next one. This routine went on for a few hours. Eventually, it was getting late. Aaron and I were planning on calling it pretty soon. We got to this one street, and as we were approaching the end, I remember seeing this guy. We were walking up the front yard to one house to go trick-or-treating there, and I glanced over a few houses down for whatever reason. These were houses that we hadn't been to yet. I saw the guy dressed in this creepy costume. He had sort of baggy and torn clothes, and part of his face was painted. I'm not sure if he was supposed to be someone specifically, or if he was just supposed to look creepy, but he was standing in his driveway and just looking at us. I guess that's why I noticed him. But then I just looked away, and Aaron and I reached the front door of the house that we were going to. We got candy there, and then went next door and got candy at the next house as well. Then we reached the house that I saw the guy in the driveway. He was no longer there, and I assumed that he went inside. We were considering not going to the house, because all the lights appeared to be off. That was usually a sign that nobody was home or that they had gone to bed. But I told Aaron how I saw the guy in the driveway just a couple of minutes earlier, so I knew that he was home and probably still up. I figured that he could give candy to just one last group of trick-or-treaters, so we went up and knocked on the front door. At first, there was nothing, but like 10 or 15 seconds later, I heard somebody walking to the door. Then it opened, and the same guy who I had seen was there. He answered the door, and we both said trick-or-treat, but the guy didn't have any candy with him. He looked really creepy with his costume or whatever it was. He just stared at us for a few seconds. Clearly this guy knew that it was Halloween, so where was the candy? I thought that maybe he had run out. He then told us to come inside. He didn't say anything else other than that. Aaron and I didn't want to. We knew better than to enter a stranger's house. When we just stood there, he once more told us to come in.
I said, "No thanks, we'll just take some candy and be on our way." The man said that we would have to enter the house and that there was nothing to be afraid of. I remember looking into his house and considering it. Maybe there was a creepy decoration he wanted us to see or something. But when I looked in the house, I saw no Halloween decorations at all. It just looked like a sort of cluttered and messy house, and all the lights were off. I said, "We'll just go then." Aaron and I started to back away to leave. The man told us again to come inside, this time more demanding. By now, we both really got creeped out. We turned around and started walking quickly away. That's when I heard the man start to leave his house. Then we both just took off running. We sprinted through his front yard and into the street. As we were running, I heard the man going into his yard and running after us. I figured that it was a joke and that the guy was just trying to scare us. But I didn't know for sure, and it was still really weird, and I didn't want him to catch up to us. So we kept running and made it back to the street. When we were running down the street to my sister's van, we heard the guy stop. He seemed to not leave his yard, which made us feel better. However, we kept running and didn't stop until we reached my sister's car. Thankfully, it was not that far away and just around the corner. We got inside, and when we were back in the car, we told my sister all about it. She said that it was a good idea that we didn't go in the guy's house and that he sounded like a creep. Then we said that we were done for the night and she could go back home. So my sister pulled a U-turn and began to drive back. This meant that we were going to drive by that guy's house again. I remember that as she drove past, we all looked in the direction. What I saw was the car that was parked in the man's driveway now running. As soon as we passed by, the car left the driveway and pulled onto the street behind us. We looked and saw the same man was driving it. Aaron and I started freaking out and told my sister to get away from him. We went down the street and my sister turned. The man went the same way. My sister then started driving faster and we went to a busier street. By now, though, all the roads were pretty quiet. He followed us to the busy street and trailed us for a little while. Then my sister randomly turned to another street. He turned as well, and my sister then turned at the first option. The man behind us did too, until my sister turned quickly again. Then the man did not. We then drove to the end of that street, which connected to the busier one. Then we went back to our street and arrived home without seeing the man for the rest of the way. After getting back, we were all pretty creeped out from it. We went inside and were afraid that the man would show up at our house or something, but he didn't. Aaron went back to his house, and my sister and I didn't see the man at all. It was a crazy experience. We never trick-or-treated on that street again purposely to avoid that guy. Looking back, I'm not sure what his intentions were. It could have just been a prank to scare us, but it seemed a bit much to me. I'm just glad that we didn't enter his house and that he stopped following us.
Back in the Halloween of 2005, I went trick-or-treating with my best friend Ryan. We met up at my house not too long after school and hung out there for a bit. Then we put on our Halloween costumes, where I was Spider-Man and Ryan was Batman. We then left my house and started trick-or-treating in my neighborhood first. Ryan also lived in my general neighborhood, but was several blocks away. It took probably 20 minutes to walk to his house. Ryan's mom went with us as we trick-or-treated, and we ended up going all the way to his house. Our neighborhood had lots of houses in it, and there were quite a few other kids out trick-or-treating as well. After several hours, we both got tons of candy. It was a great night of trick-or-treating. Then we went inside of Ryan's house and we hung out there for a bit. My mom was going to come and pick me up at 10 and drive me back to our house. Ryan and I just hung out in his bedroom, eating our candy and playing video games. Ryan's parents and older sister were also home as well. I remember that we heard a knock at the front door though, and we both got up to go see. We thought that it was probably more trick-or-treaters, and Ryan wanted to be the one to hand out the candy since we hadn't got a chance to because we had been out. He called to his parents in the other room saying that he would handle it. When we got to the door though, we looked out and we saw what appeared to be an adult man standing there. The guy was looking down, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that completely covered his head, and we could barely see his face, but he did not appear to have any kind of a costume on. Right away, it looked suspicious. Plus, it was pretty late at this point. Ryan and I had stayed out trick-or-treating about as late as we were even allowed to. The guy then knocked on the door again, and we were right there on the other side. We didn't say anything, but we went into the other room and found Ryan's parents. We told them that it was just some random guy. By then, the knocking had stopped, and when we walked back to the room, the man was gone. Nobody knew who this guy was or why he was at the door, but it seemed a little strange. Ryan and I went back to his room to continue playing video games and stuff. His room was at the back of the house, and I remember that maybe 15 minutes later, Ryan suddenly told me to look at the window. When I did, I saw what he was already looking at. The same hooded man was standing in the backyard. He was just kind of standing there. The guy was maybe 40 feet from Ryan's window. He did not appear to be looking towards us, and he was still looking down. After watching him for a few moments, we both instantly got up and ran out of the room. Ryan went back towards his parents and told them about it. They looked out into the backyard, and they turned on the light to the patio. When that happened, the man turned and left the backyard, running away. We never got a good look at his face, and it was really weird. After that, we figured that he was gone for good, and probably just a guy trying to mess with people on Halloween. So nobody called the police or anything like that, but it was still really strange. A little while later, my mom arrived at Ryan's house and picked me up. She drove us back to our house, and we got there like a minute later. When we got home, I was in the living room for a while before I had to go to bed. Then when it got late, I went to my bedroom. Like Ryan's, my bedroom was at the back of the house. I remember that I turned my lights out and was getting into bed. That's when I looked out of my bedroom window, and I noticed what appeared to be the same guy back there. I couldn't believe it. He was standing in the backyard, very similar to the way that he had in Ryan's backyard. For a moment, I really couldn't believe my eyes, but he was there. I ran out of my room and found my parents in the living room. I told them about the guy, and we all went to another back window. By the time we got there, though, he was gone. After a while, I went to bed again. It took me a long time to fall asleep. I kept looking out the window, but the man never returned. Eventually, I did fall asleep, and after that, I never saw that guy again.
This happened on Halloween when I was a kid, and I went trick-or-treating by myself. I dressed up as Batman and was planning to go trick-or-treating with my friend who was going to be Joker. I was really excited about it, but the day before, my friend told me at school that he was going trick-or-treating with another group of friends. I didn't know those guys, and I even considered not going at all, but I decided that I would just go by myself instead. I was mad at my friend for canceling, and in fact, I'm still mad at him for it today, because if I went with him, I may not have wound up in the situation that I'm about to tell you about. I left my parents' house and set out to go trick-or-treating that night at about 6 p.m. My mom told me not to go too far off from the house. We lived in a little bit of a quieter area, where the houses are a little bit more spread out. I went to all of the nearby houses and got quite a bit of candy, but I wanted more. It wasn't that late yet, and I ended up going a bit farther out than I should have. I found myself going down streets that I had never been down before and going to houses that I had never seen. I was confident still that I would be able to make my way back okay and was planning to be done soon. I remember that on the last street that I went to, the houses were even more spread out. There were less houses on this street, and most of them had longer driveways too. One in particular had a lot of trees in the front yard, and the driveway was very long with many pine cones and acorns on it. After walking up the long driveway, I made it to the front step. I walked right up to the door and rang the doorbell. Just seconds later, I heard the sound of somebody walking closer to the door from inside. Then the door opened. A man stood there, with shorter blonde hair and glasses. I said trick or treat, and the guy said that he forgot it was Halloween tonight. I felt disappointed, knowing that this probably meant the man wasn't going to have any candy. But the man then told me that he was sure he had some candy somewhere in his kitchen. He then told me to come inside his house and wait while he got the candy. I said no thanks. I knew it was weird, and I didn't want to go into somebody's house who I didn't know. Perhaps the man was just saying it to try to be nice, because it was a bit cold outside. He said okay, and then walked away, disappearing inside his house. All I could see standing from where I was on the front step was part of the living room. There was a wall blocking my view from where he went, where I assumed was the kitchen. I could see down the first few feet of the hallway leading to it, but not much else. After the man was gone, I stood there and waited. Probably about 30 seconds passed, and then I heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen area in the back of the house. I had no clue as to what it was. Then I heard the man's voice calling for me. He asked if I was still there, and I said yes. The man told me that he had just fallen down trying to reach the candy and he hurt his leg.
He told me that he couldn't get up and asked me to help. I was caught off guard by this bizarre situation. I actually stepped inside and entered the house. To me, I really believed the guy and started walking closer to him in the kitchen area. As I went down the hallway, I could start to see inside of the room where I had heard the noise. It was the kitchen, and I saw several items scattered around on the floor. Then I saw a chair tipped over on its side, but I didn't see the man anywhere. This was now seeming really suspicious. I turned around and started heading back down the hallway towards the door where I came in. At that point, I just wanted to leave. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I looked back and saw the man. He was walking just fine and headed straight for me. I sprinted away as fast as I could and quickly ran out the front door and through the guy's yard. I ran all the way back into the street and didn't stop. In fact, I kept running until I had made it home. The man did not even follow me out of his house that I'm aware of, but that didn't matter. I was so freaked out. I made it home and felt really lucky to be safe. Looking back on that night, I'm not sure what was going on there, if the man was trying to lure me inside or something. I don't think he fell at all because he was clearly just fine. I didn't go trick-or-treating in that neighborhood again after that.
This happened on Halloween night several years ago. I went out with a few of my friends and we went downtown. In the city, there are a lot of popular bars and places to hang out. At one point, as it got late, we were all at this really crowded bar with lots of other people. Pretty much everyone was wearing some type of Halloween costume. Shortly before we left, my friends and I were at the bar near the end of it. I noticed this guy wearing the creepy skeleton costume was standing really close to me. I didn't pay it much attention because the bar was so crowded, but it did seem like he was standing a little close. I just knew that he looked really creepy though, and it didn't seem like he was there with anyone either. A while later, we decided to leave because it was after midnight. We walked outside of the bar and back into the city. Out there, a good number of other people were walking around with it being Halloween night. When we started heading back, I noticed the skeleton guy leaving the bar as well. He was really tall and thin, and his entire face was painted white other than the black around his eyes. The costume was not some cheap one, but a really well done costume. So we had all met at Mariah's apartment because she lived downtown. I remember that we saw many people as we walked back, but when we approached her place a few minutes later, we saw that skeleton guy. Overall, I was just getting a bad vibe from him, and I didn't know why I kept seeing him. But I didn't really think that much of it, because once we got back, we went up to Mariah's, and then we all kind of started saying our goodbyes and leaving. I was the only one who had walked to Mariah's apartment, because my apartment was not downtown, but just across the bridge and in a neighborhood that was pretty close. It was maybe a 10 or 15-minute walk away. So I left and started walking back to my place. There were still a few people out on the street, but after I crossed the bridge and got into a little bit quieter of an area, there were significantly less people. I walked the rest of the way, and for the last few minutes did not see anybody at all. After reaching my apartment building, I walked around to the entrance. For whatever reason though, I looked behind me, and that's when I saw the skeleton guy again. He was walking towards me but was a long distance away. I didn't know what he was doing here. Perhaps he lived in my building? It just seemed like too creepy of a coincidence to me. I walked faster and went to the front doors. Then I entered the building. I quickly went upstairs to the second floor where my place was. But before going to my apartment, I went to the window looking out near the elevators. I looked down and saw that the skeleton guy was just standing outside by the doors. If he lived here, he would have entered with a key. So that told me that he did not in fact live there and he was just standing around. Then he looked up at me and I quickly moved away. I started walking back to my apartment and I saw one of my neighbors come around the corner of the hallway and go towards the elevators. This gave me a bad idea. What if my neighbor was leaving? I went back over towards the window and saw the skeleton guy still there. A few moments later, I saw my neighbor leave the building, and when the door opened, the skeleton guy walked right in. I turned around and basically ran for my apartment. I made it inside and locked the door behind me. I felt bad knowing that this creepy guy was now in my building. Was he following me? Or was this just some creepy coincidence? Over the next few minutes, I looked out of my peephole repeatedly. At first, I saw nothing. Then I heard footsteps, and soon after, I saw the guy. He walked past my door. A short time later, he walked by from the other direction. I basically stayed there at my door watching. The guy came back several times. It was like he was just walking back and forth down the hallway.
Eventually, though, he left after probably 20 minutes. When he was gone, I felt a huge relief and finally went to bed. I never saw him again after that, at least not that I know of. I have no idea what he looked like without the costume on.
I used to go trick-or-treating with my siblings or my friends every year when I was little. One year, when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, we got dressed in our costumes and went outside to start trick-or-treating. When I got outside, I noticed that in my next-door neighbor's second-floor window, there was a scary-looking man. It caught my attention because I knew that there was no grown man that lived in that house. The man in the window was wearing a jacket and a hat, but I couldn't really make out any details of his face. He looked pretty creepy, and he seemed to be looking out the window, but not really moving. So after a while, I started to think that it was just a Halloween decoration. I had to admit that it had me fooled, but if it was a decoration, it seemed pretty cool. After looking at it some more, I figured that's what it was, and we went on with our trick-or-treating. We were gone several hours, and I ended up getting lots of candy and then came back home. The man in the window was gone now, but it was pretty late, so I didn't really think anything of it. The next day, I saw my friend who lived in the house, and I asked him about the man in the window, if it was a Halloween decoration that he put up. He looked confused when I asked him, and he said that they didn't put up any decorations and they were gone the night before. I thought he was joking at first, but he maintained that he wasn't there, and he seemed pretty serious about it. It was creepy to think about it after that.
This happened back on Halloween night of 2016. I worked pretty late on Halloween, and I started driving back home at around 10 p.m. I lived by myself in a smaller house. I knew that I probably wouldn't be home for any trick-or-treaters with me having to work late, so I left a bowl of candy on my front step for them. Overall, I didn't really do anything for Halloween other than that. We had some decorations at work and stuff, but I was pretty busy with my job. So it took me about 15 minutes to drive home, and the roads were all pretty quiet by this time. I remember, though, that when I was about a mile or so from my house, I saw this guy dressed as a clown standing on the side of the road. He was sort of off in the ditch, and this was just a sort of quiet road with woods on both sides, so it was weird that he would be standing there. As I drove by, the clown man waved at me. I knew that it was somebody dressed up for Halloween, probably trying to scare people. I waved back and continued my drive home. Just a couple of minutes later, I arrived to my neighborhood. My street was pretty typical, with many houses on it, and at this hour, all the trick-or-treaters were done, so it was now very quiet. However, as I approached my driveway, I noticed something. There was another guy fully dressed as a clown, wearing a mask and everything. He was standing right in the middle of my driveway in front of the garage and holding a balloon. Even with it being Halloween, I was still creeped out at the sight. I started to pull into my driveway, but I stopped at the back end of it. The clown looked directly at me, but did not wave or anything. I thought that maybe he would walk away or something, but he stayed put. So I rolled down my window a little and I called out to him. I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He didn't acknowledge me at all, and he just kept standing there holding his balloon. I told him that I had to get my car into the garage, and he was in my way. He still didn't move though. So at that point, I wasn't really sure what to do. After like a full minute of me sitting there with the car running, I decided to just get out and go inside. I figured that the clown would move eventually. I parked my car at the very back end of the driveway, still a good 30 feet or so from the clown. Then I turned my engine off and got out. The clown was still standing there, continuing to look at me. Right when I started to take a few steps into my yard, the clown began to walk towards me, and he was walking at an angle where he would reach me before I got to my front door, so I stopped. And when I stopped, he did as well. I didn't know if it was a good idea to go for my front door anymore, because I would have to unlock it, and if he was going to chase after me, he would be able to catch up with me. Then, all of a sudden, I saw 3 more clowns come running out from behind my house. They were literally sprinting and heading in my direction. I didn't waste any time, and I instantly ran back for my car. I quickly got inside of it, locked the doors, and then scrambled to start my engine as quickly as I could. The 3 clowns, as well as the original one, ran right up to my car. One tried opening my driver's door, and the other my passenger's one. Within seconds, I was able to back out of the driveway, leaving them standing there. They didn't follow me into the street, but just kept standing at the end of my driveway. As I drove away, they all at once started waving at me. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen. I drove out of my neighborhood and just went around random streets for like 5 to 10 minutes. Then I went back home, hoping that the clown men would be gone. If they were still there, I was going to call the cops. But thankfully, when I arrived back, they were all gone. I got out of my car and I looked through my backyard as well as front, and nobody was there. But when I got to my front door, I saw that the balloon that the one clown had been holding was now tied to my door handle. It was one last thing to really creep me out. I went inside and was a little worried that the clowns might return, but they didn't. That was my scariest experience that I've had during Halloween.
A few years back, when I was 10 years old, me and 3 of my friends all went trick-or-treating together. It was a yearly thing for us to all go together because we lived in the same neighborhood. I remember that I dressed up as a football player, my friends Jeremy and Lucas went as basketball players, and my friend John was a robot. We started early at about 5 p.m. near Jeremy's house. He lived on the edge of our neighborhood, so it was a good place to start. Then we would work our way back, block after block, to the end. It was a very large neighborhood and had houses of all sizes. We would always get tons of candy every single year. We made our way through the neighborhood, stopping at my house for a few minutes to take a quick break, and then we kept going. We ended up finishing the neighborhood at about 8 p.m. We thought about calling it a night, but it wasn't really that late yet, so we decided to make the walk through the park nearby to another area that had more houses. These houses were more spread out and had a lot less other kids trick-or-treating. The first couple of houses gave us large amounts of candy, and then we knew that we made a good choice to come there. Then we came upon this one house that had a very long driveway. In fact, we almost didn't see the driveway and we walked right past it until Lucas pointed it out. It was a driveway surrounded by trees on the corner of the street. When we started to walk down it, we saw that it went downhill quite a bit and then turned. We figured not many kids had been to this house and maybe they'd give us the rest of the candy or something, so we walked down the long driveway. When we reached the house, we saw a small light on the front step and a zombie decoration holding a sign. The sign said something like, "To finish the prize, follow the zombies," and the fake zombie was pointing in the direction of another zombie that was next to the house in the yard. We walked to the second one, and it was pointing towards the garage which was behind the house. Me, Jeremy, and Lucas ran toward it to try to get all the candy first. There was another zombie pointing to behind the garage, and the final zombie outside that pointed to the door of the back of the garage. Looking back on it now, I see how sketchy it was, but we just really wanted the candy and didn't really care. The 3 of us opened the door to the garage and walked inside while we heard John walking behind us and laughing. When we got inside the garage, it was almost completely dark except for a small light coming from a desk chair with a zombie sitting in it holding a large bowl of candy. The 3 of us inside the garage had big smiles on our faces when we saw how much candy was in the bowl. We knew we could take almost all of it because of how late it was getting. We all walked to the candy, but as we did, we heard the garage door slam shut behind us. We turned expecting to see John, but he wasn't there, and about 1 second later, the lights went completely out and all we saw was darkness. We were a little freaked out, but laughed it off as a prank and started taking the candy. Just then, I felt someone grab my arm. I could tell it wasn't one of my friends because of how strong the grip was and how big the hand felt. I started getting pulled away, so I shouted, "Stop." My friends started asking me what was going on. We heard John trying to enter the garage, but at that point it appeared to be locked because the doorknob just kept jiggling. I started screaming help, hoping my friends would be able to help me, but they just shouted back asking where I was. At this point, whoever was there put their other hand on my other arm and was basically leading me slowly deeper into the garage. John then started pounding on the door. After about 5 seconds of John pounding on the door, I was suddenly released from whoever was holding on to me, and I heard a grown man's voice from the other side of the garage yell at us all to get out. The door was then unlocked, and John opened it and just stood there while the rest of us dashed out as fast as we could. We ran all the way back up the driveway and back to my house. It was a terrifying experience, and I really don't know what was going on inside that garage. We didn't report it or anything, which was probably a mistake, but my friends and I still talk about it all the time.
I live alone and have a smaller house in a quiet neighborhood. I don't really celebrate Halloween, but I do enjoy decorating a little bit, and every year I hand out candy to the kids who come to my house. Usually, I would get about 10 to 20 trick-or-treaters if I had to guess. A couple of years ago, it was a typical Halloween. I had a few decorations on the front step, but not too many. I also had a bowl of candy inside for the kids, and I was just hanging out in the living room when I got home from work. Kids started arriving pretty early, but about the typical number showed up. When things got dark, and it was maybe like 7:30, there was another ring of my doorbell. I got up and answered it to see two kids dressed as some type of superheroes. They were probably about 10. I said hi to them and gave them some candy. One of the kids asked me who the guy was who ran behind the house. I was a little confused. The kid asked me if the guy lived here and was trying to scare them. He said he almost didn't go to the front step because of the guy. I still didn't know what he was talking about, and I asked him. The kid said that when they started to head up the driveway, they saw a man dressed in all black, including a mask covering his entire face. The guy was standing by the door, and when they got about halfway up the driveway, the guy suddenly ran around to the back of my house. I told the kids that I didn't know who that was, and he must have been another trick-or-treater. The kids told me that the guy was definitely an adult. I was a little bit concerned, but I told the kids that I didn't know and then sent them on their way. When they left, I wasn't sure if the kids were just messing with me or not. I didn't think that they were, but I guessed it was possible. I decided to go around to the back of my house from the inside and look out the window to the backyard. When I did, I didn't really see anything, but the lighting back there was not the greatest. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, but figured that it was nothing really. I went back to the living room and sat back down in my chair. Several minutes went by, and I didn't get any trick-or-treaters in that time. But then, I heard the sound of my back door rattling, like somebody was there and trying to get inside. I instantly thought back to what the kid had told me. I got up from my chair and walked over to the back of the house. When I got near the door, I looked out the window and sort of saw a guy there. My view was mostly obstructed, but I could tell that somebody was there, and the person was wearing all black, including a mask. This was definitely the guy. Then, he backed up and moved a little ways away from the door. I walked over and turned on the light switch to the outside back light. When I did this, the guy took off running. I had a decent view of him as he left and ran back out of my yard and around to the front of my house. It was a man at least 6 feet tall and dressed in all black, covering his entire face as well. I couldn't tell what he looked like at all. I went back around to the front and saw the guy walk back out into the street and then out of my sight. For the rest of that night, I got maybe 2 or 3 more trick-or-treaters. The guy never came back, and I was looking out my windows to make sure. I'm glad that kid told me about the guy. It creeps me out thinking back on it. I really don't know who he was or what he wanted. I'm guessing that he was going to try to enter my house through the back or possibly even break in. When I turned on the light, I must have scared him off, but I don't know if he chose my house randomly or if there was a reason for it. I'm hoping that he never comes back.
It was Halloween night 2022. I live alone in a neighborhood that's not that busy. I have a house and about an average-sized yard. But on my street there are not a ton of houses, so I will maybe get like 10 trick-or-treaters a year. Still, I get candy for them, and I just give each kid a lot of candy, so I'm sure that they're happy about it. So on this night, from the early evening until about 8 o'clock, I got the usual amount of trick-or-treaters. It was mostly a pretty quiet night.
Then at like 9 o'clock or so, there was a knock at my front door. I went over to look, thinking that it was just another trick-or-treater, but it was not. There were about 5 grown men all standing there. Each of them were wearing full head masks of various creepy characters. I don't know who all the characters were, just that one of them was a clown and another was like an old man mask. Aside from the masks though, they were just wearing normal clothes. They seemed like grown men, because most of them appeared to be around 6 feet tall or taller. Either way, I decided that I didn't want to answer the door for these guys, so I went back over to the living room and sat down. However, about a minute later, they knocked again. This time, it was louder. I didn't get up, thinking that they would not knock a third time, but they did. This time, it was even more loud. I was frustrated and got up to walk over to the door. I supposed that I would answer and see what the guys wanted, but as I was walking over there, I heard someone try opening my front door, which was locked. As I approached, I saw out the living room window one of the men running by and another approaching the window. The guy who went to the window then started to bang on it. Meanwhile, I then heard knocking at my back door, which was really loud. Then I heard another banging coming from a window at the other end of my house. It seemed as though the men had split up and were all at different parts of my house now, and they were all either trying to actively enter my home or bang on a window or door. It was a pretty scary thing, and I decided to call the cops. I knew that I couldn't fight off 5 grown men, and it sure seemed like they were trying to break and enter. I went down in my basement and called the police from there. For a while, I heard the banging as I waited. Eventually, though, it stopped. Unfortunately, all the men ran off before the cops got there. After officers arrived, I went out and talked with them about what had happened. They pretty much just made a report, drove down the street and looked around a little, and then left. I was happy that the guys were gone, and I was hoping that it was just a Halloween prank that went too far. Definitely way too far. For the next few hours, things were fine. Then I went to bed. However, I was awoken to the loud sounds of banging coming from all around my house again. It was pretty much the same thing as before. They were at all angles of my house, trying doorknobs and banging on windows. I got up and didn't know what to do. They did this for about a minute. Then they stopped. I went to a window and saw the same guys, still wearing those masks, running away. I didn't call the police again. I stayed up for a little while, seeing if they would return, but they did not, and then I went back to bed. After that night, it never happened again. I obviously don't know who those guys were because they had masks on. They were probably just trying to scare people on Halloween, but they took it way too far.
It was Halloween night, and I was excited about the party at a friend's off-campus apartment. It was a costume party, and I ended up having a lot of fun. It was packed, and just overall a fun evening with my friends. Eventually, around 1 a.m., I decided to head home after saying my goodbyes. The drive home would take about 20 minutes. As I was leaving, I noticed another car pulling out at the same time, and they ended up turning the same way. I didn't think much of it for most of the drive, but eventually I noticed that they had been behind me for the entire drive, tailing me pretty closely as well. I decided to test it out if I was being followed, and tried to shake them off. I made a few turns, hoping to lose them, but the car still followed me. At this point, it still could have easily been a coincidence, but I had concerns, especially because of how close they were following me. I turned onto a less traveled road, and the other car stayed right behind me. I glanced at my rear view mirror, and the headlights were glaring back, illuminating the interior of my car. I could see the outline of a figure behind the wheel, but I couldn't make out any details. I even increased my speed, hoping to create some distance. I took a sharp turn onto a dirt road that led to a nearby park, hoping to lose them in the twists and turns, but the car stayed right on my tail. There was no way I was going to let this person see where I lived, so I just kept driving. I decided to head back towards the main road, desperate to find a place where there were more people. Before I could get back to the main road though, things escalated. I could see them trying to get beside me, speeding up and trying to force me off the road. I thought about calling for help, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the road. I swerved to avoid a collision, and the next time they came up and tried to push me off the road, I slammed on the brakes to avoid them. The pursuing car, which was now ahead of me after I slammed on the brakes, veered sharply and lost control, flying off the road into a ditch. I stayed in my car but didn't leave yet because part of me still wanted to make sure they were okay and call an ambulance if I needed to. After a few seconds, they emerged from their car. The driver stood up and faced me. They were wearing a Grim Reaper costume with a mask covering their face, so I assumed that they must have been at the costume party that I had left from and followed me from there. After the confirmation that they weren't dead from the crash, I sped out of there and finished the rest of my drive back home. When I finally got back to my apartment and locked the door, I called the cops, explaining the situation and where the crash had happened. I later learned that when they arrived at the scene, the person in the costume was nowhere to be found, and the car they had been driving had been stolen. I was still very nervous after that night because whoever had been following me knew what my car looked like and probably had my license plate, but I never had any following encounters. This happened back when I was a kid. It was Halloween in the year 2002, and I was 9 years old. I was really excited to go trick-or-treating around my neighborhood and get as much candy as possible. In years past, my parents took me trick-or-treating. This year, though, my dad had to work late, and my mom was home with my younger brother, who was just 2 years old at the time. I think he was sleeping or something, so he didn't go. My mom said that I was old enough to go trick-or-treating by myself, though. Our neighborhood was usually pretty quiet and also pretty safe. It was a long street with many houses on both sides. Then there were several other streets nearby that were also like ours. Overall, it was a very large neighborhood. So I went out early and there were many other kids out. I started on our street, going door to door and getting lots of candy. After our street, I went to the next one over. Then I went up and down it and my bag was getting filled with candy. Still, I wanted more. I knew that there were tons of other houses past the park that was at the end of that street. So I walked through the park and then started going to those houses. Pretty soon, there were not many other kids out at all. I became one of the only ones, as it was quieter over here, but it was also later at night now. I went down a couple of streets there, just enjoying the freedom of being on my own and getting so much candy. I guess I lost track of time. It was 2002, so I didn't have a smartphone like all the 9-year-olds do today. In fact, I didn't even have a watch, so I had no idea what time it was. Finally, though, my legs were getting tired from all the walking, and I decided to head back. I almost got lost, because I was farther out than I had ever been before, and I wasn't sure which way to go. But eventually, I made it to a street before the park and got my bearings back. By now, there were like no other kids out trick-or-treating. It was pretty quiet. However, I remembered that I saw this pickup truck start to slowly drive down the street. It was the first car that I had seen in a long time, and the truck had this light on top of it. It wasn't a police light, but just like a general rectangular light on the roof. I remember that the truck was gray and it started to drive towards me. I got a bad feeling, like I think any kid would, seeing a random car slowly driving towards them at night. I walked faster, but the truck easily caught up. Then when it got a little bit in front of me, it stopped. I looked over and saw the driver's window go down. There was a man behind the wheel. He called out to me, telling me to stop. I did, and the man asked me where I was going. I said that I was going home. The man said that I was out after curfew and that he would have to drive me home. I was not aware of any curfew laws, but I had also never been out that late before by myself, and I was a 9-year-old kid, so I didn't know that much. But I did know better than to get into a car with a stranger. I told the man that I was sorry and that I lost track of time. He said that he would have to tell my parents and that he also needed to give me a ride home. I said that I would walk home now and that it wasn't that far away. The guy said something like curfew law said that he had to drive me home or something like that. I started to walk along the sidewalk and the guy told me to stop and get in the truck. I really didn't want to, so I just took off running. I went down the sidewalk and then I cut through this one random yard. I ran through a few backyards and then went into the street that was behind ours. From there, I cut through more backyards until I eventually got to our backyard. Then I ran around the house and made it back inside. When I got in, my mom told me that she was beginning to worry. I told her about the guy, and she said that there was no man in a truck who was supposed to drive kids home after curfew. She called the cops and reported him. A short time later, my dad came home, and my parents talked to the police, who then talked to me. It was crazy, but I felt better because I had a ton of Halloween candy.
I used to go trick-or-treating every year as a kid with my best friend Danny. We went to most of the houses in the neighborhood that we both lived in. Danny was my next door neighbor, which was really cool. We became like brothers over the years and are still friends today. So on this one year, when we were probably like 12 or 13, we went trick-or-treating around the neighborhood. We always kind of did the same route and went to just about every house that we could walk to. We would stay out for hours and end up getting lots of candy. On this year, we went late into the night. I don't really know what time it was, but probably after 9 p.m. Towards the end, we came up to this one house. There was a really long driveway, I remember, and as we approached, Danny said that we should turn back. The lights were all off, except for a small one on the front step. This generally meant that the homeowner either wasn't home or wasn't going to answer the door. But then I noticed a sign. Sometimes when people didn't want to answer the door, they would just leave a bowl of candy and you could help yourself. We went up to the door where the homemade sign was taped. It said, "Candy at Garage." Now, obviously this sounds kind of weird and did to us at the time as well, but we were curious and we walked to the left of the house and sort of behind it to where the garage was. When we arrived at the garage, the main door for the cars was closed. However, there was a door next to it for people to walk through, like a front door to a house. That door was wide open. Inside the garage looked mostly dark, but we could see that there was a dim light on inside of it. Honestly, it gave me the creeps. I didn't know if that's what the people wanted or what, but right outside of the open garage door, there was a chair with a large bowl on it. There was still a decent amount of candy inside of it. When Danny and I saw this, we got excited. We didn't want to take all of it, but it was pretty late and figured that they wouldn't get many other kids coming here. We both took a large handful and left some for everybody else. But right after we did, we heard a noise coming from inside the garage. Danny and I were both asking each other if we had just heard that or not. We looked inside the garage. It had most of the typical things that you would find inside of a messy garage. Of course, we couldn't see everything, but there were various large boxes, a lawnmower, yard equipment, and some tools, things like that. The sound had come from the back of it. Then, we saw from the back of the garage somebody stand up. It was a man, and he wasn't wearing a costume or anything. The guy stood up and looked right at us, but didn't say anything. Danny and I were too stunned to speak. It looked like he had been hiding back there. Then the guy started walking towards us. Danny and I moved back and started to walk away. I know that I just wanted to get out of there, but after we had made it about halfway down the driveway, I heard the footsteps behind us. We looked back, and the man was now completely out of the garage and walking towards us. That's when Danny and I started running, and the crazy thing is that the guy behind us started running as well. We made it back out into the street and ran as fast as we could. After we made it to the end of that street, we could hear the man still behind us. He was probably like 30 feet back, but slowly gaining on us. I made the decision to cut through another neighbor's yard, whose backyard connected with mine. We hopped the fence relatively easily and then ran through the backyard into ours. The man behind us hopped the fence after us. I couldn't believe it. Soon, though, we were back in my backyard. We ran around the house to the front and got inside. Then I locked the door and found my mom and told her about it. We looked outside, but didn't see the man in our front or backyard. I never saw him again after that. After talking with my parents and Danny about what had happened, we had a few theories. One was that the person just lived at that house and was trying to scare us. However, my dad knew the entire neighborhood pretty well and said that he was sure a woman lived there and not a guy of the description that we gave. Sure, it could have been her friend or something, but it was a little bit elaborate just to be a scare. Another theory is that somebody had wandered into the garage to possibly steal something and we startled them. Then they chased after us. It also could have been something completely different. Whatever it was, it made for the scariest Halloween that I've ever had. Back when I was in college, during my senior year, I lived in a house with 4 other girls. When it was Halloween, we had plans to go out with friends. First, we went to another friend's house. All of us roommates were friends, but we also had groups of friends from college that were larger. We had many of the same mutual friends, but several different ones. As the night went on, we all split up. We went from someone's house to another, to a bar, to another bar, to another one. Every place was pretty much packed and really busy with other college kids. At most places, many of the people were wearing Halloween costumes and disguises. I was with my friends and sometimes my roommates as well. Overall, it was a pretty typical night out in college. I drank some, but didn't really get that drunk.
However, after being out until really late at night, I finally left the bars to go home. I didn't know where any of my roommates were at this point, but I thought that they had all gone back home. I walked back on the sidewalks. When I arrived back to our house, I entered. It had 2 stories, with all the bedrooms being upstairs. After going inside, most of the lights were out. It seemed as though I was the last one to arrive back, and everybody else was home already. I was about to head upstairs when I heard something though. Somebody was in our kitchen. I walked over thinking that it was one of my roommates. However, when I got there, I saw this random guy standing there. It really took me by surprise. He had a costume on of sorts with part of his face painted. I really don't know what he was supposed to be, but as soon as he saw me, he told me that he didn't want to scare me. He said that he knew my roommate and mentioned her by name. Then he said that he was an old friend of hers and that she had told him that she could stay there for the night. He said that he would be sleeping on the couch in the living room and was just about to go to bed. I had never seen or heard of this guy before, but I believed him. I said okay and good night, and then I walked over to the stairs. I went upstairs into my bedroom. Before going in my bedroom though, I saw the light was on in one of my roommate's rooms, the same roommate who allegedly knew the guy. So I texted her asking if she was awake. She was, and I asked her about the guy downstairs. She told me that she was not aware of any guy downstairs and that she didn't invite anyone over. When I read that, I could not believe it. I was really freaked out. Meanwhile, I heard the guy downstairs walking around. He was an intruder. We were not quite sure what to do. After texting the other house members in the group chat, all the others were awake as well. We texted back and forth and debated calling the cops. Honestly, we should have called them right away, but I think that we thought he might just leave. We were very tired though, and also slightly drunk, which may have affected our decision making. Then about 10 minutes later, I heard him start to walk up the stairs. Thankfully, we all had locks on our bedroom doors and locked them. That's when we finally called 911. We reported an intruder in our house. When the guy reached the top of the stairs, he seemed to stand there for a while, because I didn't hear any footsteps. Then he started to walk closer to my room. When he got near my door, before he had a chance to open it, I yelled as loud as I could that I already called the cops. Still, after hearing this, he still tried the door. He did not say anything, but tried to enter my room. Then, after realizing that it was locked, he walked away. He went back downstairs and then left. The police got there like 10 minutes later, but sadly the man was long gone by then. All I could do was give a description, but with part of his face being painted, he could easily look a little different. We never heard anything more, and I don't think that he was ever found. We never saw him again after that. When I was a kid, my family would visit my grandparents every holiday. They lived in a small town, and my aunt lived just 2 houses down from them. But between my aunt's place and my grandparents' place was the house of a woman everybody avoided. She was a large woman, over 6 feet tall, and she dressed in a long dress with heavy work boots. Around her neck, she wore what looked like logging chains. The only time we ever saw her was in her backyard, tending to her garden or outside scrubbing the walls of her house. It was strange. She'd be out there for hours just cleaning the outside of her home. But what stuck with me was her voice. She'd scream at us kids from her yard, hurling all kinds of insults, saying the devil was coming for us. The adults always warned us to stay away from her and ignore her. She scared us to the point that when we went between our aunt's house and our grandparents' house, we would run the short distance past the strange woman's house, convinced that she'd be watching us from the windows. One Halloween, things took a turn. We were all gathered at my aunt's house, planning to go trick-or-treating. One of the older cousins dared the younger kids, which included me, to go knock on the creepy lady's door. We didn't want to seem like cowards, and in the group, there were 6 of us, so surely nothing bad would happen to a group. We went quietly onto the porch and reached for the doorbell. As soon as it rang, we heard loud banging sounds from inside, like doors being slammed or furniture moving. Eventually, the door swung open, and there she was, standing in the frame, holding a severed head which looked disturbingly real. We scrambled off of her porch and screamed as we took off running. We could hear her voice behind us as she laughed and shouted that the devil was coming for us. We told the adults back inside our aunt's house about what happened and about the head. They all just dismissed it as a Halloween prop and scolded us to stay away from the woman's house. The rest of that Halloween night was uneventful as we went trick-or-treating and stayed far away from the weird lady's house. About a month later, my parents got a phone call that the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries. The lady had one of those rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it, putting it over her head and attempting to saw it off. My aunt was able to escape, and my uncle came and beat the lady up with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels inside her home, and they were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents', and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of her gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort of underground, which had a few severed heads around it, revealing that the head we saw on Halloween night was indeed very real. My aunt survived the whole encounter, with the only damage being a scar across her neck. It's very scary to know what the lady was planning to do once she finished her tunnels. I'm glad that my family is safe now, and even more glad that we didn't live in that town.
This happened back when I was in 7th grade, and I was trick-or-treating with one of my friends in his neighborhood. His neighborhood is divided up into 3 parts. The first part is what I used to call the normal part. This part is just like every other regular neighborhood. The houses are close together without long walking distances in between. The next part is what I called the big part, which is where all the larger houses were. Finally, there is a section that was very spaced out. In this part, there are a few houses here and there, but there are long distances between them. So my friend and I started out at the neighborhood Halloween party, and then continued out to the normal part, and then the big part for trick-or-treating. Everything went smoothly and was normal, and then we decided to go to the area where the houses were very spaced out. We already had a lot of candy, so we weren't planning on staying too long. We went 2 or 3 hours, and everyone was friendly and gave us candy as usual. But then we went to this one house that had all the lights on and a big bowl of candy outside. It's probably worth mentioning that my friend and I could see a few adults sitting and talking in the living room or dining room of the house. Regardless, him and I ran up to the bowl and started shoveling as much candy as we could into our bags. We didn't stop until we heard footsteps in the house. Then we booked it. We were just getting out of the driveway of the house when we heard a door open behind us. We started running down a small paved path nearby, and then stopped to turn back and look to see if whoever came out of the house had followed us. We saw them in the driveway walking around as if looking for something. Him and I decided it was probably a good idea to go back. We assumed that nobody would follow us down the path just to try to get candy back, so we assumed that we were safe. This is the part where things get creepy. As we were walking down the path, my friend and I would occasionally turn around and joke, "Oh, look at that, it must be the person from the house." We would run for a few seconds until we got tired of the joke. However, there was one point when my friend turned around and then stopped. I stopped him, wondering why we stopped and what he was looking at. "Look over there," he said. He pointed back from where we came, a little off the path. We could see a human figure moving in the darkness on the side of the path, following us at a distance. The most reasonable explanation was that it was somebody from the house that we took the candy from, still following, but we weren't sure. Either way, we wanted to lose them and not have them find out where we lived. Without warning, both of us took off at the same time and ran all the way back to the Halloween party that we came from. I don't think it was the person whose candy bowl we robbed, because I don't know anyone who would react that way to a couple of kids taking too many pieces of candy. But whoever was there was trying to be very sneaky and follow us without us being aware of them.
When I was in college, Halloween was always a big time for parties and such. During my junior year, I shared a house with a couple of my roommates who were some girls I had met and become good friends with during my freshman year. All of us had a bunch of our friends over to our place for a Halloween party, which was a total of about 20 or 30 people. Our house was small, but we did have 2 floors, but it was basically a typical old house you would find in a college neighborhood. Our university was pretty big, so I'm sure there were a bunch of other parties going on that night as well. We all wore costumes, and I recognized most of the people, even though they were wearing disguises. At about 10 p.m., most of us wanted to go out to the local bars in the college town. We all started to leave, but there was this one guy who I had no idea who he was. He was dressed as the Joker from Batman, but he had on a mask instead of painting his face, so I couldn't recognize him at all. I went over and asked him who he was, but he didn't answer me. He just kind of looked at me and then sort of walked away. There was music playing and other people talking, so maybe he didn't hear me, is what I thought. Eventually, I went upstairs to get my wallet and keys, and when I came down, most of the people were gone, aside from my roommates and I, who were all set to leave. We left the house and locked up. Then we were able to walk to the bars because they were only a few blocks away. I was out for maybe 2 or 3 hours. I
remember I think it was a Thursday and I had class the next morning, so I decided to go back a little after midnight. I didn't want to be out too late, and my roommate Liz and I walked back together. Our other roommates said they would come back later. When we got back, I unlocked the door and went inside first. As soon as I did, I heard a noise from inside. I realized quickly that it was coming from the inside of the closet we had just in front of the stairs. I walked over and opened the door. When I did, I saw the guy who was dressed as a Joker, but his mask wasn't on now. I could clearly see that he was an older looking guy, like in his 50s, and I had no idea who he was. Before any of us had a chance to do anything, I slammed the door back and immediately ran away. Liz saw me running, and we both went outside. I called the police, and we began walking right down the street in the direction we had came from. We later went back when the police were there, and we were told that the man was now gone. Our entire house was searched, but they couldn't find him. I guess he had been able to get away. I'm not sure how he knew to go into our house, but apparently he had hidden in the closet while we were leaving. It's really creepy that he was hiding in our house alone the whole time we were gone. We must have caught him off guard when we got back, and he went to quickly hide in the closet. I'm glad I heard him, or else who knows what would have happened.
This happened many years ago when I was a kid. I think I was maybe like 12. It was Halloween night, and I was going trick-or-treating with my best friend Danny. He came over to my house after school, and then we both went out trick-or-treating together. I remember we started as early as we could and went a few blocks away and got into a larger neighborhood first. We pretty much stayed out as long as we could, and after going to every neighborhood within walking distance of my house, we went back to my street. My street was not all that long and had a dead end on it. There was maybe 10 houses on it in total, and most of my neighbors knew me, so that's why we would end with my street. We got to all the houses, and then ended with the house at the very end of the street. Danny and I walked up the long driveway that it had, and knocked on the door. It took a while, and we thought maybe we had gone too late and our neighbor had gone to bed, but after maybe 30 seconds, the door finally opened. It was our neighbor named Kim. She was always very friendly, and in years past gave us huge candy bars, probably because our street hardly ever got any trick-or-treaters. Immediately, when she answered the door, something seemed off. She seemed really nervous and not friendly at all, as if she was scared of something. Now, we were only 12 years old, but I could still tell that something seemed to be wrong. She said hi to us and asked what we wanted. We both said trick-or-treat to her. She then apologized and said she would get some candy for us, and slowly walked back around the corner to another room. We waited there and looked confused. It's weird that she didn't know it was Halloween. When she came back a short time later, she gave us both a large candy bar and asked us how our night had gone. We told her it was good, and we had already gotten a ton of candy, and her house was the last one we were going to for the night. During this time of talking to her, I noticed out of the corner of my eye, there was a dark hallway in the back of her house, and a man's face appeared for a brief moment, and then disappeared again around the corner. He looked sort of creepy, and I knew that she lived alone, and I was confused who this guy was and why he seemed to be hiding. As much as this situation seemed off, we were kids and I didn't really know what to do. So after this, we were all just kind of standing there, and then we said bye and left. We watched Kim close the door, and as we were walking down the end of the driveway, we looked back towards her house and saw the guy's face now looking out the front window at us. He looked angry, and I asked Danny if he had seen the guy as well. He said that he had, and we both agreed it was really strange. We went home after this, and my mom asked us how things had gone. We told her it was well, and then I remembered how things sort of seemed suspicious at Kim's house. My mom seemed concerned and said that she was going to call her. After that, Danny and I sort of went off into my room to eat candy and play video games. It wasn't until the next day that I learned more about the strange situation. After my mom had called Kim on the phone, she was somehow able to find out that things weren't right at all. It turns out an old ex-boyfriend that Kim had broken into her house and confronted her when she got home that day. We happened to stop by after, and when we told my mom, she called her, and she let my mom know enough information for her to call the police. They were able to arrive and handle the situation, and it made me happy to know I was able to help, and that Kim ended up being okay.
This story takes place years ago when I was a kid. For some context, it was probably about 2003 if I had to guess, and I was about 6 or 7 years old. Even though I was so young, I think I remember this night pretty well. I got really excited for Halloween when I was younger, because I loved trick-or-treating and getting lots of candy. The whole day was always a fun time. I remember that year I was going trick-or-treating with my older sister, who was about 10. Our parents trusted us to go trick-or-treating around the neighborhood by ourselves, and they would stay back with my younger brother. He was very young and maybe like 3 years old. My parents would hand out candy and take care of him while we were gone. Our neighborhood had lots of houses in it, and they were all roughly the same sizes. At the end of the street, there was a park, and then more streets of houses past that. We were planning to go down our street, and then maybe 2 or 3 more of the closest other streets. We didn't want to go too far out, and our parents had also told us not to. I'm not sure what time we left to start, but the sun was just beginning to set. I was a race car driver for Halloween, and I don't remember what my sister was, but there were quite a few other kids out, and we saw some walking down the street as we were leaving. One by one, we went to the houses on our street. We knew some of the neighbors around nearby, and they all said hi to us. Soon, though, we got towards the end of the street where we didn't know the people as well. It was around this time when I remembered that a van drove past us. The street was generally pretty quiet, but it wasn't uncommon for cars to drive by. The only reason I remember the van is because it drove past us going the other way just like a minute later. When it drove past us, it was also going extremely slow. Our parents had always told us to be aware of slow-driving cars. It was probably just somebody with kids who were trick-or-treating, though. My sister and I went to the next street over where the van had come from. The street connected at the end, and we started at one side of the street and then went to all of the houses. Then we crossed to the other side, went to all of those houses, and then we wrapped around to the park. When we were almost done with that street, the van drove by us again for a third time. This time, my sister said something. It was still going very slowly, and my sister mentioned something about how we kept seeing this van. It certainly was a little bit strange. I remember that it was a tan conversion van, and I couldn't tell who was driving it or anything. As my sister and I were approaching the park at the end of our street, we saw the van once more. This time, it drove extremely slow and then stopped near us. We both looked at it, and the driver's window rolled down. There was a man driving it, who had a grayish beard, glasses, and was wearing a baseball cap. He said hi to us, and then held out his window a large bowl of candy. He said something like, "Hey kids, come and get some candy." I remember he had a big smile on his face. Now, my sister and I were always told not to approach strangers, and obviously not to approach strange vehicles either. But being that it was Halloween, and it looked like he was just passing out candy, this seemed different. I mean, you would never knock on all of your neighbors' doors at night, but on Halloween that was okay. We stood there just staring at the guy for a moment, and he told us that it was all right and waved us over. He had been maybe 20 feet away from us, and there were no other kids nearby in the street. My sister started walking towards the guy, so I followed. When we reached his driver's door, he told us to take as much candy as we wanted. There were a bunch of mini fun-sized candy bars in the bowl, and we each took like 2. I remember him telling us to take more, and he seemed super friendly. We each took some more, and then the guy told us that he actually had a lot more candy to give out. He said there was a bunch in the back of his van, and we were welcome to help ourselves. Then he pointed to the side door of the van. My sister and I both knew better. This was really weird, and although maybe he did have a bunch of candy back there, we didn't want to find out. I just shook my head, and my sister told the guy no thanks. He was pretty friendly still, and said that it was all right. My sister and I then turned and started walking through the park on the path that it had. The guy remained in his truck and did not immediately drive away. It looked like he was just watching us as we walked farther and farther away from him. I know that I felt a little bit creeped out by this. We walked through the park and eventually reached the next street over. Then we started going to the houses on that street, one at a time. My sister and I got lots of candy on that street, and our bags soon became full. We decided to head home, and that's when we saw the van once more. We saw it enter the street from the other end. My sister pointed it out, and we were pretty close to the park. As it approached, we actually started running to the park to get away from the van before the guy would see us. When we were able to get back on the path that led back to our street, we watched as the van drove by. It was still going extremely slow. My sister and I talked about it a little,
and how weird it seemed. I was really young, but I knew something was off, and my sister, I'm sure, knew more than I did. We walked pretty quickly back to our street, and then we just had to walk down it until we got to our house. In the time that we were walking down our street, we did not see the van at all. Finally, we made it home, and we got inside of our house. It was probably like 9 p.m. or so by then. When we got inside, we would start eating candy and watching TV or movies. Shortly after arriving home, though, I was in the living room and noticed something out the front window. The van was driving by again. I called for my sister, but she was in the kitchen with my parents. Then, the van actually stopped on the side of the road, right in front of our house. My heart started racing, and I yelled for my sister and my parents. A few seconds later, they came into the room and I showed them the van. My dad pulled back the blinds to look out the window, and when he did, the van began driving away. We told our parents how we kept seeing the van, and the guy gave us some candy. I remember our parents talking to us about strangers and stuff, but it seemed as though the guy was finally gone for good now. It must have been a weekend or something, because I know that we were staying up late that night. For the next couple of hours, I was eating candy and hanging out. I was in the living room, and my parents, I think, were in the kitchen. I was watching TV when I heard the sound of a car driving down the street outside. I raised the blinds a little and looked outside to the street. The van was back. I watched it to see if it would drive past again. It was moving very slowly, like always. The van went a little bit past our house and then pulled over and stopped on the side of the street. This was really creepy. Then, the driver's door of the van opened and the man actually got out. When I saw this, I started yelling for my parents again. They came into the room, and the guy was now walking into the front yard. I said that the guy was back, and my dad walked over to the front door of our house. He opened it, but as he was opening the screen door to go outside, the guy turned around. He then started running back to his van, got inside, and then drove away. I couldn't believe that he had returned yet again. This time, my parents called the police. I remember they came out a short time later and talked to all of us. We reported the guy for being really suspicious. After that, we didn't see him for the rest of the night. I'm really glad that he didn't come back. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, my sister and I possibly came very close to being abducted. We were never going to go into his van, but the fact that he wanted us to was very suspicious. I'm hoping that the guy wasn't actually harmful, but I don't know how else to explain his suspicious behavior.
Halloween night in 2016, I was 8 years old. That year, my mom asked me if I wanted to go to a haunted maze for Halloween and bring 2 friends, and of course, I said yes. My parents picked up my 2 best friends, Drew and Jarrett. We got to the place around 7 or 8 p.m. It was the big building with lights and decorations, and behind it was a huge maze with some patches of woods. I remember you had to go inside the first building to pay for your tickets, and then they would let you in the maze part. It was what you would expect from a haunted maze. Animatronics popping out, spooky music, fake fog, nothing too serious. We stayed together for the most part, but at some point we split off into groups. My mom and Jarrett went one way, and me and Drew went another. We were just walking around laughing when a man in a scream mask popped out from behind a corner. We jumped so bad we almost fell over. He wasn't wearing a costume, just regular clothes with the mask. A few seconds later, he started talking. He said something like, "Hey kids, sorry I scared you. I've got candy in the back if you want some." Even at 8, we knew that was messed up, and we told him no thanks right away as we continued walking away through the maze. About an hour later, we were getting close to the woods part of the maze. It was darker and quieter over there. That's when we saw the same guy again. He wasn't hiding or anything, just walking behind us. We tried to ignore him and keep walking, but then he started speeding up. Eventually, he broke into a full run, and we panicked and started running too. I guess we were faster than him, but Drew got scared and took off in another direction. I didn't know where he went, and now I was by myself. I started calling for him, and then, out of nowhere, a hand grabbed my shoulder from behind. Another voice said, "Grab him! Grab him!" I don't know how, but I twisted away and ran as fast as I could. Just as I turned a corner, I heard a loud pop from the woods nearby. It was a gunshot. It echoed off the walls. I didn't stop. I ran straight back to the front entrance. I saw my mom with my 2 friends and a few staff members standing around. My mom looked like she was crying. I ran up to them, out of breath, and started yelling about what happened. The police were already on the way because of the gunshot, and I told them everything I knew. A few hours later, we found out there was no staff member working that night wearing a scream mask. Nobody matching his description was supposed to be there. A few days after that, my mom told me that the police found several weapons, including rifles, hidden in the woods behind the maze. I still don't know what that guy wanted, and what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away, and what the gunshot was in relation to all of it. I don't think it was shot at me. It sounded like it came from the woods nearby, though. That was the last time I ever went to a haunted house.
This is something that happened one year on Halloween when I was younger. I remember that my friend Sierra and I were going trick-or-treating, and my brother was going to drive us. He had recently gotten his license and was several years older than us. With him driving, we could go to more houses and also stay warm, because it was a cold night. Also, the houses are spread out a bit in the neighborhood that I lived in at the time. We first went to all of the houses on my street, and then my brother drove us across a busier street to another neighborhood. After that, we were able to go to another neighborhood, but we hadn't really planned on going to another one. I guess we had made better time having a car, and my brother drove to another nearby neighborhood that we had never been to before. This one was a little bit bigger and had houses that were not as far apart. Sierra and I were able to walk to a few houses in a row without going back in the car. There were also a decent amount of other kids in this neighborhood. It proved to be a good decision because it got us a lot more candy. As we were in that neighborhood though, Sierra and I went back to the car, and then my brother started driving, but soon a car appeared behind us. My brother pulled over to let it pass, but the car then pulled over as well. It was not right behind us, but a little ways back. My brother ended up driving us up a ways, and we went to a couple more houses. When we got back in the car behind us was still there. It remained behind us as we finished up that neighborhood. It was following my brother slowly and just appeared to be a normal sedan. Then we were going to go home. We weren't really sure who the car was, but we didn't give it that much thought. When my brother drove away though, so did the car behind us. We couldn't see anything like who was driving, we just saw headlights. Sierra and I had never got that good of a look at it or paid that close of attention. When my brother made it out of that neighborhood, the car left as well. We were all wondering who it was and why they were seemingly following us. We went back to our neighborhood, which only took like 2 minutes, but the car was still behind us. We didn't want to go back home with the car following. My brother said that he was going to try to lose it. He drove past our house to the end of our street, which happened to be a cul-de-sac. He drove around it, and the car did the exact same thing. There was no question that they were following us, and we didn't know what to do. My brother left our street and drove out to a busier road. The car behind us started getting closer. Then my brother turned at the next street and drove down it. This street was very quiet, and the car behind us would not leave us alone. When we reached the end of that street, there was another quiet road. We went left, and the car behind us did too. My brother then did a quick U-turn and turned back to the other road that we had just been on. He then drove back to the busier road. That's when we got lucky. The car behind us was still back there. It was a little bit farther behind after the U-turn and everything, but it was still there. But on the busier road, a police car happened to be driving by. We got on the road behind it, and the car behind us turned the other way. Then, my brother drove back to our house, and thankfully the car was nowhere in sight. We never found out who it was in that car, or why they were following us.
This happened when I was a freshman in high school on Halloween night. My friends and I weren't quite at the point in high school where we could have any sort of Halloween party to go to, and we were too cool to go trick-or-treating, of course. We were a tight-knit group of 5 girls. We had grown up together since we were babies, and we lived in a rural town outside of city limits. To set the scene, this was a very remote, woodsy area. In our small town, one of the more thrill-seeking activities to do was what we called rolling yards. This was basically throwing rolls of toilet paper up into trees so that streams of toilet paper hang down. It's hard to explain the kind of adrenaline that you get sneaking down a rural road in the pitch black, turning down a long gravel driveway, threatening the group's lives if they make a sound. If you get caught, your parents find out, and maybe worse, you're stuck cleaning up the mess the next day. So my friends and I had decided the 2 weeks prior to this night that we were going to go on a Halloween rampage, and specifically we were going to roll the creepy house right down the rural road my friend lived on. This house had a big scare story between my friends and I for years. We would go on afternoon walks after school and pass by it often. Nobody ever came in or out of the house, but our friend's parents told us that a man lived there and he was a bit of a creep. She gave us a strict warning to stay away from the area. Looking back, the mom worked in law enforcement, and she probably had much more sinister reasons for us to stay away than she told us at the time, of course. The night went like this. Our friend's older sister drove us to the local Walmart after our parents went to bed. All 5 of us loaded up in the back seat of the car, piling onto each other's laps. We parked in the near-empty parking lot of the store at around 11:30 p.m. Then we made our way towards the toilet paper aisle, hyped up on pure adrenaline. We filled the 2 shopping carts completely full of the 99-cent rolls of toilet paper, snickering to ourselves as the clerk eyed us suspiciously while we were checking out. We threw all the rolls of toilet paper into the trunk. On the way back out of city limits, we turned down the music to discuss the play-by-play for the attack. Our getaway driver would park down the dirt road that led to some cow pastures about a mile from the man's driveway to wait on us. The 5 of us would split up into teams, walking along the edge of the woods by the road quietly. If a car would pass, we would drop to the ground and hide. We filled our arms full of rolls of toilet paper and headed towards the long gravel driveway of the targeted house. We each grabbed our rolls of toilet paper and went into the woods alongside of the gravel driveway to creep towards the house. We finally saw the faint light coming from the side of the house by the garage. It was the most terrified I had ever been. Not only was the house creepier in the moment than when we walked past it during the day, but the thought of getting caught by the man that we were specifically told to stay away from was terrifying. But regardless, we ripped open a pack of toilet paper and hurled it up towards the sky. They went towards the highest branch of the big oak tree directly in front of the house. Soon, streams of white were falling out of every tree surrounding the house, and we were getting very cocky and even more fearless the longer we attacked. Suddenly, my friend stopped dead in her tracks and made a loud hush noise. I stopped and hid behind a tree, my heart literally in my throat, as now I saw what looked like lights turning on from inside the house out of the corner of my eye. We dropped our remaining rolls of toilet paper and began running in the pitch-black dark to the woods. Another girl in the group tripped and fell on a branch behind me, and I turned to help her when I heard it. Several gunshots rang out loudly from the house, and the man was yelling maniacally into the woods. We all kept running, all crying and wheezing from the adrenaline, and we headed towards the entrance of the driveway. When we were about to reach the entrance, we heard something even worse than gunshots, the sound of a diesel truck engine coming up the gravel driveway slowly. We quickly went as deep into the woods as we could without notifying him that we were hiding, and we stood silently with our hands over our mouths to not make a noise. The man stopped his truck about 30 yards away and turned off his engine. It was totally silent. I could see him from where I stood, and he had a shotgun over his shoulder as he walked towards the opposing side of the driveway, clearly looking and listening intently. In that moment, I truly thought we were going to be found and killed. No one except for our getaway driver knew where we were. Our parents were all asleep. Our ride was a mile down the road, oblivious in her car. I was trying desperately not to cry and sniffle in the silence when I saw the man's shadow raise his shotgun in the air and fire around. I began to feel faint, truly thinking that I was about to pass out from fear when I saw car lights just up the road from the driveway. Panicking, I wondered if the lights would illuminate us in the woods and give us away. But the car seemed to slow down, and I realized that it was our friend's older sister, our getaway driver. She rolled down her window and was talking loudly from opening her car window, giving what I assumed were the police the address of the house that we were at. This made the man angry, and he yelled and ran towards her car for a moment, then backed away, cursing loudly and waving his gun into the air. As soon as he began driving his truck back around the driveway towards his house, we sprinted full speed towards the car and got in. We were crying hysterically, unable to speak, and sweat pouring down us. No one said a word. We cried all the way back to the house. We showered, and I could hear sniffles and crying all throughout the night into the morning. No one said a word about it to any of our parents. We never went rolling again, to say the least. What had begun as a childish prank turned out to be one of the most horrifying experiences of my teenage years, because we lived in the middle of nowhere and we had technically been vandalizing someone's yard. The older sister told us about a week later that she had faked the call with 911. It's still shocking to think about. All I can say is we got lucky that night. Looking back, we should have called 911. We were naive kids who were more afraid of getting in trouble than realizing how at risk we were of being hurt or killed.
This story happened many years ago when I was a kid. I think I was 11 years old. I remember that for Halloween every year, I would usually go trick-or-treating with some friends, and then we would hang out afterwards. On this year, I was planning to trick-or-treat with my friend Tyler, and then he was going to come over and hang out at my house afterwards. My house was sort of big, and we had a cool basement with a big TV for playing video games or watching movies. We also talked to our friend Alex at school earlier in the day, and he was planning on coming over that night, but he had to go trick-or-treating with his sister, so he wasn't going with us. When the night arrived, Tyler and I went all around our neighborhood and beyond it to the surrounding neighborhoods. We were out until about 9, and we got tons of candy. Then we walked back to my house where my parents were. Tyler and I went down into the basement and played some video games while we waited for Alex to get there. This was before the days where every kid had a cell phone, so we didn't know exactly when he would be there. We left the back door to the basement unlocked for him to come through though. My parents were watching a movie upstairs, and we were down in the basement for about 20 minutes or so when we heard the back door open and shut. It was around the corner from the room we were in, and we assumed that it was Alex arriving. I called out to where we were and told him to join us. However, I didn't hear Alex respond. I got up and walked out to the hallway near the back door. Nobody was there. It was weird because I was so sure that I had heard the door open and shut. I went back and asked Tyler if he had heard the door, and he told me yes, he heard the exact same thing that I had. I looked all around the basement once more, but nobody was there. I thought maybe Alex had opened the door, but then decided to go around to the front or something, and I went back to playing video games with Tyler. Only 5 minutes or so after this, I thought I heard somebody walking around in the hallway, and then I heard another door open and shut. The basement living room area where we were was completely out of vision of the back door and hallway with some guest bedrooms in it. It sounded like one of the bedroom doors had shut. I got up and walked over, and when I did, I saw one of the doors was in fact shut. I couldn't quite remember exactly if it had been open or closed before, but I was pretty sure it was open. I was sort of creeped out now and went back to tell Tyler about it. Just then, I heard the back door open and shut again. Then I heard Alex's voice. I walked out and saw him standing in the doorway. He asked me what was wrong when he saw the look on my face. I didn't say anything until all three of us were in the living room together, and then we told him all about what had happened. I decided I would go up and find my parents and tell them about everything, but before I did, we once again heard the back door open and then close. I walked out and saw the bedroom door that had been shut was now wide open. I ran to the back door and locked it quickly, and then ran upstairs and found my parents. My dad came downstairs and looked around. Then he went outside. After doing so, he came back in and said he couldn't see anything that looked out of sorts. I never saw who was in the house that night, but it creeps me out to think about it every time.
I'm a female, and this is something that happened several years ago when I was in college. It takes place on Halloween night, and I was at a new university. I was a junior, but had recently transferred from a different college, and this was my first year there. Because of this, I lived in the dorms. I was able to make some friends at college pretty quickly at my new school, and by Halloween, we had plans to hang out. There was a few Halloween parties going on at some friends' houses and things like that. I dressed up as a cowgirl and walked with my friend to another friend's house. They were having a costume party. This lasted until maybe 10 or 11 at night, and then the people left to go to some bars nearby. I went with some of my friends, but the story really starts when I left the bar. Obviously, with it being Halloween, just about everybody had a costume on of some sort. It was sometimes hard to tell who everybody was. Eventually, though, at one of the bars we were at, I got tired and wasn't feeling it anymore. I decided to go back and go to bed. But none of my friends wanted to leave yet. It was maybe a little past 1 o'clock in the morning. I didn't think it was a big deal that they didn't want to go, and I would go back by myself. The walk back to my dorm would only take like 10 minutes, and it wasn't that cold out or anything. I left the bar and started heading back. There were a few people out on the sidewalk at first, but it got much quieter. I headed down one of the sidewalks back towards campus. That was only a couple of blocks. When I was almost at campus is when I saw the guy walking a ways back on the sidewalk behind me. He was dressed up as the Joker from Batman, but he was wearing a rubber mask instead of painting his face. I had remembered seeing him at one point in the bars. I didn't know who he was, but I figured that it was maybe another student. The guy was maybe 100 feet behind me. As I walked home, he did the same route as me and remained behind me. I stopped paying attention to him though, but when I was back at campus and approaching my dorm, I noticed him again. This was a little bit odd, but he possibly lived in my dorm building. I remember I kept seeing him a ways back, just walking closer to me. He also appeared to be looking at me the entire time, but through the mask, I couldn't really tell. Eventually, I made it to my building and got inside. When I was in, I went to the elevator and up to my floor, which was the 3rd floor. Then I walked to my room and got inside. I changed and then was about to go to the bathrooms down the hallway. When I did, I heard somebody was going to walk past my room from outside. Instead of just walking out of my room, I looked through my peephole to see who was there. I saw the guy dressed up as the Joker walking by. I thought this was kind of strange. He then stopped at my door, which was really weird. That's when I wondered to myself if he had followed me back. Still, maybe he just lived there. My floor was all female, so I knew he didn't live on this floor. He was standing around for a few seconds, and then he kind of started pacing a little bit. He didn't really go out of my view though. Then, at one point, he removed his Joker mask. This revealed that he was probably not a college student. The guy looked to be in his 40s, or maybe even 50s. He was short and heavy-set. I had no clue what he was doing here. Then he put his mask back on and went up to my door and tried opening it. Luckily, the door was locked. He stood there, right on the other side of the door from me. It was terrifying. Then, I heard somebody's door opening from down the hallway. The guy then turned and walked away to the left. When he was out of my sight for a while, I opened up my door and looked out into the hallway. I couldn't see him, and he must have left the floor. I went to bed a short time after that, and I don't believe the man ever returned, but it was really creepy to know that he likely followed me all the way from a bar into my dorm building.
I was probably 5 or 6 when this happened. Most of the day is a blur now, but I still remember Halloween night better than anything else from that time. My mom, sister, and I went trick-or-treating with my aunt and her kids. We walked from house to house, and everything was fun until we got to one place that was decorated like a full-on haunted house. It was over the top with fog machines, strobe lights, fake blood, and all of it. My mom, who's always loved horror stuff, was excited. She and my aunt wanted to take pictures, and my sister was just as thrilled, but I hated it. I started crying as soon as we got near the yard. I remember begging not to go, saying I was scared. My cousin, who was about 13, offered to take me back to the car so the others could keep going, and they would join us after they finished the block. We walked back down the street and got in the car. We sat in the back seat and she handed me her phone to play a game. I calmed down after a bit, just sitting there with her in the quiet. I remember the inside of the car being dark, except for the glow from the phone screen. Then I saw movement outside the window. A man was standing next to the car. He started tapping on the window. It sounded sharp, and I looked closer. He had something in his hand. At the time, I didn't understand too well, but now I know it was a knife. He was using the tip of the knife to tap on the glass. My cousin said that by the sound the knife was making on the glass, it was a real knife, not a plastic Halloween prop. My cousin pulled me towards the middle of the SUV. The man leaned down and put his face on the glass of the window, still tapping the knife. His mask was white. I don't remember exactly what kind, maybe Michael Myers, maybe just a blank white mask. He walked around the car, trying each door handle one by one. First the driver's side, then the back, then the other side. They were all locked, which was good. He came back to the window where we first saw him and stood there for a little longer, peering through the glass and tapping the knife on the window. Then he walked away from the car, not even really in a rush. He just turned and walked down the street, disappearing between two houses. A few minutes later, my mom, aunt, sister, and cousins came back. We jumped out of the car and ran to them. My cousin told them everything. My mom said that it was probably some creep messing around because it was Halloween, and my aunt agreed. Nothing else happened to us that night, but I never forgot it. I never went trick-or-treating again after that, not even once. Even now, years later, every Halloween I get scared when I see people in masks. It might have just been someone trying to scare kids, but when you're 6 years old and there's a man with a knife tapping on your car window, it doesn't feel like a joke. And honestly, even though I'm older now, it still doesn't feel like a joke.
Years ago, when I was a kid, I went trick-or-treating with my best friend Trevor. We started out in my neighborhood, which was actually pretty small. There were only like 10 houses on it total, and we went to all of them within like 15 minutes or less. After that, Trevor's mom came and drove us to his neighborhood. Now that was much bigger. Trevor lived about 5 minutes away from me, but you had to drive to get there. His neighborhood had a lot more houses and was also right by a golf course. After we got there, his mom went inside, and Trevor and I began going to all of the houses on his street. The street went back quite a ways and curved around a lot as well. It almost seemed never ending. It took us hours, but finally we were able to go to all of the houses on it. We each used a pillowcase to store all of our candy in, and they soon became extremely heavy. But we were not satisfied. We wanted more. Trevor and I have always been competitive guys. We would weigh our Halloween candy when we got back home to see whose was heavier. I don't really know why we did that, because if we all went to the same houses, technically they should be the same. But it was still fun to see. So after we reached the end of his street and went to all of the houses, there was a sort of busier street there. It was by the golf course and was quiet with no cars on it at the time. We walked on the side of it until we got to another neighborhood, which only took us about a minute to get there. Then we entered that neighborhood and started going to more and more houses. We went for probably another hour, and finally it got really late. People stopped answering the doors, and more houses had their lights off. Finally, we decided to go back home. The only problem was by then, we had gone so far out that we weren't quite sure how to get back to Trevor's house. The last neighborhood we were in was very large, with several curving streets. Especially with it being night, it was really confusing. We thought we knew how to get back at first, but quickly found out that we didn't. After about 10 minutes of walking around, we realized that we were lost. Neither of us had a cell phone back then. Trevor just had a watch, so we had to figure it out on our own. We knew that we weren't all that far off, but we just didn't know exactly where or how to get back. We walked down a few streets, and then we came across a large stretch of woods on one side. Trevor said that we should cut through the woods. He told me that he was sure his neighborhood was on the other side. The woods were very dense and thick, and part of the golf course. It was also really dark in there. It seemed a little bit scary, but I said okay. Trevor seemed pretty confident about it. We both entered the woods and started walking. We had nothing to shine light and make it easier to see. We were just walking straight ahead and occasionally getting hit with tree branches, but we pressed on. About a minute or two in, we heard a noise behind us. It sounded like somebody was walking through the woods a ways back. Who on earth would be doing that, though? We looked behind us, but couldn't really see anything at first. We kept going and tried to go faster. I'm not going to lie, I was pretty scared. We kept going and continued to hear the person behind us. Trevor and I then both stopped and listened. Whoever it was behind us stopped as well, and things became silent for a second. Then they started walking again, closer to us. Within a few seconds, a man came into view. I couldn't see him very well because it was so dark, but I knew it was a man and I knew I didn't recognize him. Trevor called out to him, but the guy didn't answer. We then both started running through the woods as fast as we could. We could hear the guy running behind us when we did. I didn't look back, and I tried not to pay attention to the sound of the man running. After probably a minute of this, we finally made it out of the woods. It was a great feeling. And even better, I realized that we were in fact in Trevor's neighborhood now, and not far from his house at all. We finally slowed down and stopped to look back at the woods. We were a little ways away now, and thought that the man had stopped chasing us. But that's when we saw him emerge from the woods. He wasn't running or chasing after us, but he did see us. As soon as we saw him, we took off running again. We were able to make it back to Trevor's house safely. Then we were able to weigh our candy and finally relax. I don't know who that guy in the woods was. Him chasing us through the woods was one of the scariest experiences of my life, though.
This happened almost a decade ago when I was 13 years old. I remember my friend and I were excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents. It started like any other Halloween night. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and had a lot of fun. At 8 p.m. we realized we had to head home, but on the way back we dropped by my teacher's house. She wasn't home and the street didn't have many streetlights. To add to this, most of the houses had their lights turned off and no Halloween decorations up. My friend and I were slightly spooked and disappointed by the lack of candy, We wanted to get off of the street as soon as possible. That's when a man emerged from under one of the few streetlights. It was a police officer. Neither of us seemed to notice him before this, possibly due to the darkness. He startled us, but seemed very friendly. The cop introduced himself and pointed to one of the dark houses with no decorations. He said an older man living in that house was inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone called the police, but when he arrived, nobody was answering the door. He kept telling us his police car and partner were just around the block. We looked around, but couldn't see them. I was a paranoid kid. Growing up, my mom loved watching crime shows, and she'd always tell me tidbits of lessons. One of them was a story about fake cops. Although I don't remember the details, I remembered people can pretend to be police officers to gain trust. Throughout this whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of a badge, police car, and partner did not feel right. I was also conflicted because he was smiling and seemed like he just wanted to help. That was until we heard his strange request. He said that he needed to speak to this potential predator and needed our help. Since we were young girls, the man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed that he would hide behind the bushes next to the front door. He would wait for the man to invite us in, then jump out and catch him red-handed. At that moment, I knew my friend felt the same way I did. We both fell silent, but my friend managed to ask the officer if we could discuss. The cop said yes, but told us we had limited time. The street was silent, and he could hear everything that we would say to each other. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing that he would hear us and escalate the situation. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient and told us that we had to decide quickly. At that moment, a family came down the street and noticed the officer. They were coming over to see what was happening. That's when the cop said he would be right back and to not go anywhere. My friend and I scrambled to collect our thoughts and decided to run away. We sprinted out of the street and didn't look back. On our way home, we discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop to him playing a prank on us, or him being a real cop, but we misunderstood the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads drove to the house and the area around the house. No cop cars or police officers were in sight. Over the years, I can say I regret not calling the police. At the time, my friend and I were convinced that we misunderstood what happened. We even told our class the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought it was not alarming. Looking back, I find it extremely strange a police officer would put two children in such a potentially dangerous situation, especially without our parents present. I wonder what his motives were, but it will unfortunately remain unsolved.